Oh, there we go. Hey, everyone. Anark working through technical difficulties here, and this is another Anark live stream. Fixed, I assume. Now, the question is will the camera keep working? It's been doing some wonky stuff already. Let me get myself zoomed out a little, or zoomed out. Oh, got my monitor in view there. Zoom in a little then, I suppose. Okay, there we go. That's something. Oh, yeah. See the autofocus coming in clutch. So I think we're actually doing this. I think everything's in order now. Oh, I have several people here who are my biggest fan. Well, welcome, my biggest fans. Now I have to put this link out in a bunch of different places, as I do. How's everybody doing today? Okay, I think that's good enough. You know, 2 places. It's about the extent of my efforts right now. Nice. Well, I'm glad people are doing good. I'm glad y'all are joining me. I'm always surprised when these sort of impromptu live streams actually get people in them. I'm like, oh, wow, people are actually like just paying attention, huh? Is that because y'all are like expecting something on Friday, or is that just because y'all were just like available at this time, or... That's great to hear, Ultra Cosmic. Rojava and the Zapatistas are definitely something we should all be studying and looking to. And as Zal says, the 10th communique from the Zapatistas is really good. They are kind of going in on everybody who doubted them from that last communique that was released. What books do I recommend for learning about anarchism? You should go watch my reading list videos. I made a big series of videos. It was just a bunch of reading lists. And the very first one is like introductions to anarchism. But as for my answer here, I would say, honestly, the very first chapter of the book, Anarcho-Syndicalism, Theory and Practice by Rudolf Rocker, is one of the best introductions to anarchism that I've ever read. It just doesn't get recommended very much because it's just the first chapter, you know? So, but I would really like to see that first chapter kind of like just turned into a pamphlet and distributed and to have more people read it, because I think it gives one of the best overviews of what anarchism is of anything that I've ever seen. However, you know, most people are going to recommend something like the Anarchist Program or an Anarchist Program by Malatesta, even though there's a few things in there that are a little dated, but it's still really good. If you already have at least some familiarity with political theory, you could probably just go straight to Anarchy by Malatesta. But yeah, those are generally good places to start. The ABCs of Anarcho-Communism by Berkman, also a good place to start. Yeah, Zal's right. The whole book of Anarcho-Syndicalism, Theory and Practice is really good. However, the rest of it it sort of starts becoming more about anarcho-syndicalism in specific. So when somebody asks me for an introduction to anarchism, I generally don't want to tell them read that whole book, because the whole book isn't necessarily an introduction to anarchism writ large. It's more of just an introduction to anarcho-syndicalism. But the very first chapter is an overview of anarchism and the philosophy, political theory, and methods of anarchism. It is excellent. Highly recommend. Your opinion on the antithesis to anarcho-syndicalists, that being the national syndicalists along with its parent ideology, Sorelianism. It bad. National syndicalism seems to be basically just fascism as far as I can see. And Sorel himself became a fascist to my knowledge. So I would definitely not recommend anybody look into that as an anarchist. I don't think it's going to be very helpful. I do know Cafe Kyoto. However, almost their whole channel is, I believe, in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, so it's hard for me to consume their content. Not that I wouldn't like to. They're actually one of my followers. Cafe Kyoto seems pretty cool, but unfortunately can't speak Spanish. So. Zal says, I'm doing my best to avoid my job. I'm so happy that I can help you do a work slowdown. Here you go. That's praxis. John Doe asks, what are good criticisms of nationalism besides the fact that it relies on the existence of the state? I would say first you have to really qualify what you mean by nationalism. If all you mean by nationalism is a sort of like common culture and heritage of a people in a particular region, then nationalism isn't inherently bad, and in fact can be part of leading to a national liberation struggle, which can be good in ousting colonial powers or in getting rid of some foreign invading state. That can be good, but I would say that it is not at all sufficient to undergo a revolutionary transition from capitalism to something like socialism. So I would say that anarchists should be open to but critical of national conceptualizations of the world. And as you say, it is highly related to statism. The nation state itself is just bad. The nation state is not good. I would say, once again, it's one of these things where, in a relative sense, it's better than not having a nation state and being occupied by a colonial power, but it is not going to lead to liberation for the people who are currently being occupied, insofar as that it is not going to lead to them having control over the world around them. It's just going to lead to now being ruled by a national bourgeoisie instead of a foreign bourgeoisie. Schizo Dashnock says, hey, Anark, quick question. What's the difference between government, governance, and the state? Honestly, it just depends on who you ask. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you how I think of those words. To me, government just is the body of people who get together and determine how the civil functions of a society are going to be determined. And that government can be centralized or it can be decentralized. And in that sense, governance is just the action of doing that of the government. The government undergoes governance. And so in my mind, I'm open to using this word government in a much wider variety of circumstances, such as you might imagine there's such a thing as like self-governance. And you might not, for example, I would say that what anarchists usually advocate would be some form of like horizontal governance. However, I understand why anarchists are generally not open to using that term, and they're not a big fan of it. In fact, you're going to find that a lot of anarchists describe anarchism as being anti-government. Now, for me, the state is a particular kind of governmental form, and that is one where the vast majority of people are alienated from control over those civil functions of society. So that's to say where you have some sort of narrow bureaucratic class that makes decisions about how law, the implementation of police forces, the military, regulation, banking and regulation, taxation and all of that takes place. And, there's more, but, those are just some off the top of my head, judges and the courts and things like that. That's all determined by a small group of people, not by the totality of society. That's what I consider the state to be. JB says, there are a lot of ties between anarchism and fascism, national socialism, national syndicalism, or national anarchism, and they even sometimes use red and black colors. No, there aren't any more ties between anarchism and fascism than any other left ideology and fascism. And that's because in the early 1900s, the fascists recruited from pretty much all left persuasions. So this included people of all different kinds. But the vast majority of leftists who became fascists were state socialists. To the degree that there was a point in history where Lenin considered Mussolini to be one of the most notable and laudable figures of the state socialists in Italy before Mussolini rose to power. So actually, of course, anarchists, being just people, are going to make mistakes, but they don't really have any more emphasis, or they don't have any more of a pipeline to fascism than any other tendency. In fact, I would say less of a pipeline to fascism than any other tendency. Jerubot says, just curious, how many people did you have before forming your orgs? Like, how many people before you guys formed Co-op Tulsa? Literally, there were 2 of us. 2. Me and Roberto Mendoza created Cooperation Tulsa. Another friend of mine, Frank, was present in helping us draft a charter, but was not a very active early member. You only need 2 people to form an organization. I just want to make that clear. Everything in Cooperation Tulsa started with 2 people. Do you have any idea what percentage of leftists tend to be libertarian versus authoritarian? I'm new to all this and only see it on YouTube so far, but it seems like there are a lot of MLs. I would say it's really dependent on where you are. I think that's an extremely circumstantial answer. Here in Oklahoma, we have very, very few authoritarian leftists. It's really not a very popular tendency. But if you were to go somewhere like New York City or Los Angeles, you'd find there is a lot of them. But then you'd also find, for example, in California, there is a lot of anarchists as well. So, yeah, it really depends on where you go. And there's in entire states, or I don't mean like, states here in the United States. I mean like, nations, other places, countries, where it's majority authoritarian leftists. But what I'm seeing is almost everywhere on earth, we're seeing a trend up of libertarian socialists and anarchists, as opposed to where we were recently. And to me, that is very heartening. Anakihi says, do you find it as irritating as I do when auth leftists try to quote on authority, but at the same breath try saying their states aren't authoritarian despite Engels calling them such? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just demonstrates that this is all like a rhetorical game so that we don't talk about the concept of authoritarianism, so that there can't be a discussion about structure and the differences of different kinds of structures. I mean, that's exactly what they do, right? In one breath, they'll say, well, everything is authoritarian. And in the next breath, they'll say, well, our state isn't authoritarian. And then the next breath, they'll say, authoritarianism is meaningless. It's a big rhetorical cop-out. It's a way to get you off the subject so that they don't have to play defense. One thing you'll find is that authoritarians hate playing defense. They want to always turn it back around onto the offense. It's all attack, attack, attack. So if you put them on the defense, they get uncomfortable, and they've developed a ton of rhetorical techniques to never have to play defense. Game Talk Time says, because there's such a divide between urban and rural, how could that be changed with anarchism, and how could they both unite? Well, let it be said that anarchism, of course, is not going to be some huge spanning program that we just implement all at once. It's going to be something that we do by beginning to construct things in the here and now. So that means that the process of anarchism growing is a process wherein we begin to transform conditions as they currently stand, right? We're not going to take power and then impose them. We're going to begin to slowly construct the new conditions. And it should be said, it will still be very difficult to repair that rift between the urban and the rural. This is a classic issue for the left. But I do think anarchism has a strong chance of doing so if anarchists can understand that they are not only supposed to concern themselves with the urban centers, but in fact, they are also supposed to be concerned with people in rural areas, people in the suburbs, people in exurban areas, and all of that. So part of what I've advocated to people is that we understand that all of those contexts are important and that people need to work within all of those contexts. One of the mistakes of the left has been going to the city centers and thinking that everything has to do with radicalizing the city centers. I'm not trying to say that they aren't important. They're extremely important, but that's not all this is going to boil down to. We have to begin developing ties between the rural and the urban now, and not only creating networks of distribution and solidarity, but creating organizations to begin with in all of those areas. So that's step number one. Thoughts on video specifically about what types of organizing people can get started with. Think many who discover leftist politics through online don't know where to start. I've tried to do so many of those, but I found that no matter how many of those I do, people still want more specific details. Lucky for you, I will continue providing more and more specific details because I'm really trying to encourage you all to go out there and do the work. But I am finding that I think a lot of people have a sort of learned helplessness where no matter how specific the details are, they don't want to fill in the blanks themselves through experimentation. They want to be given a roadmap, an exact roadmap. And much as I will continue to provide such a roadmap, I think that people need to take some responsibility, get out there and just start trying things. Start talking with people. Start doing the first things you can do rather than trying to have every single little detail understood before you begin attempting things. Will says, do you agree that voting for the only viable option, Biden, is a harm reduction strategy is important? Only if you live in a swing state. And even then, I don't think it really matters. I mean, we can see that Biden is continuing the war machine. He's currently funding a genocide in Israel. You know, Biden has not been a great president. If you want to vote for Biden, vote for him. If not, it doesn't matter. If you are in a red or a blue state, it literally doesn't matter. Only go vote if you care about a ballot measure or something. I have not read Words of a Rebel or Oppression and Liberty. What do you think of people doing co-ops? Co-ops are good, but I want to emphasize they need to be worker cooperatives, not consumer cooperatives. Consumer cooperatives, I don't think really have any revolutionary potential. Worker cooperatives, I think, are good, but I also want to emphasize you need to think of those worker cooperatives as being embedded in a larger struggle. So don't just think about how to affect your own bottom line. Ask yourself how you can funnel certain, maybe 5-10% of your profits into organizations, revolutionary organizations, to help them grow, and then they can also promote your cooperative through whatever means they have available. What are your thoughts on Maoism? Are there any good aspects of it that are worth learning from? I mean, I think in some ways Maoism is better than Leninism in several ways, I would say. But it's also in some ways worse. And I think it actually developed and perfected the cult of personality and the methods for developing a cult of personality in a way that even Stalinism really did not achieve. So I think it actually is more susceptible to building cults. And that's saying something, because Stalinism is extremely susceptible to building cults. But yeah, Maoism, at least ostensibly, has some concept that it cares about what the people think. And it is not as reductionist about only the proletarian having a revolutionary potential, which is good, because it means it actually has some ability to speak with the people in rural areas. Nesler says, I stumbled upon your channel a few weeks ago via the algorithm. Not a question, but wanted to say I'm glad you advocate for using all the tools at our disposal. Namely, you don't discourage voting. Yeah, I don't encourage or discourage voting because, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. So I don't really care whether you do it or not. And I think it's a waste of our time advocating that people do it either way. Oh yeah, another thing I want to say is, like the video. I think that does push it maybe a little bit. Not really sure. I don't think live streams get pushed in the algorithm, so I don't know if that really matters, but maybe it makes it a little more likely for people who subscribe to see it in their home feed. I don't know. But yeah, also, if you appreciate the work that I'm doing here on the channel, don't forget to go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK. There's like $2, $5, $7, $10, $20. Any amount you can give per month is an enormous help for me in developing the channel. Like, for example, today I have to go do my other job because I, still have to make extra money in order to make ends meet. But, if my Patreon were to provide enough money that I didn't need a second job, then I would be able to just do the channel. I wouldn't have to leave here in like, 3 hours, maybe. We'll see. It might be earlier than that, because I wouldn't have to go to this other job. I wouldn't have to pack those in with my schedule. It also makes it very difficult for me to juggle all of the things in my life, including, writing the script to part 4 of Modern Anarchism. Let's see here. I'm going to turn it to live chat. So many questions in here. When answering one of my questions, you mentioned the confederation of horizontal structures, which confused me, as a confederation or structures imply society or government. So what's the difference? Yeah, I mean, given how I just answered what I mean by government, but here's the thing. You might be misunderstanding that anarchism is against structure, is against coordination, against organization. It's not. Anarchism just wants to create organizations where everybody involved makes the decisions. And that if there is somebody who's delegated to do something, people get to choose the scope of that delegation, and they can just choose to revoke that delegation or abolish its entire structure completely. So for example, look at the Zapatistas. They had a particular motto, and it prevailed for, I think, somewhere around 15 years, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe longer. And I think 20 actually, and it prevailed for a long time, but the people at the very bottom were the ones who ultimately made the decisions. So what they were able to do was completely dismantle the previous structure and put a completely new structure in place, because the old structure was not serving them. They were having problems with corruption, with people in positions of quote unquote authority, abusing that authority. So they abolished those positions of authority. That's something that can happen when you have a horizontal structure for making decisions and organizing ourselves. That's not something that can happen if you build a hierarchical structure, because the top of the structure is never going to abolish its own position of authority. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing to understand. Anarchists aren't against organization. They aren't against structure. They're against the coercive, dominating nature of a hierarchical power structure, wherein decision-making is concentrated in the hands of very few people. Ultra Cosmic asks, how to convert an authoritarian leftist to anarchism? I think it's going to be somewhat difficult, but one of the things you're going to have to do is break through the brainwashing about the past state projects. And that's going to require you to study their ideology well enough to know the sorts of things they're going to argue. And then you're going to actually have to study the history of these projects so that you can explain to them what actually took place and what the alternative of the anarchists would be. So I recommend probably a good primer would be to watch my video series, The State is Counter-Revolutionary. And then after that, go read some stuff about the C&T FAI and the Spanish Civil War, because having the examples about how their structures went wrong and then having the example of the C&T FAI as a possible example of what we could do instead is going to be useful. Even then, you're going to have to learn all of their rhetorical maneuvers and all of that. But yeah, you're going to have to do a significant amount of reading, I would say. There are other methods, like purely rhetorical methods, asking them about concentration of power, whether, who should be empowered in the process, and what does it look like for people to actually be empowered. But yeah, I think that it's not going to be easy for me to boil down here. Yeah, as Grinning Guy says, authoritarianism reproduces authoritarianism. That's exactly right. It can't make authoritarianism cannot become horizontal, whereas horizontalism can do momentary authoritarianism if it has to. It can delegate people into positions of decision making, but those people are just never able to stay in those positions without being able to be revoked and the structure be dismantled by the people themselves. So horizontalism is more flexible than authoritarianism. Alexander 5 says, Stalin redefined the meaning of socialism after Lenin's death, and that socialism was possible in one country. Did you see that redefinition by the Bolsheviks and Lenin beforehand, and was it different? The definition of socialism has kind of been up in the air. The general consensus of the meaning of socialism is just that it means worker ownership of the means of production. So obviously, yes, that 100% can take place in one country. That's not really up for debate. However, is it going to be effective if you only develop it in one country? That's the part I think that it's kind of up for debate. I think it's going to be difficult for it to be effective in one country. But again, I would say absolutely yes. In fact, it's going to have to start in one country. You're not going to have one global revolution all at once. It's kind of absurd to think that you're just going to, every single nation is at the same exact time going to revolt and put socialism in place. So what you're going to have to do is develop it somewhat unevenly in the territories where you can develop autonomy and therefore develop worker ownership of the means of production. But that phrase socialism is kind of, just gets tossed back and forth. The authoritarians love just redefining it. They give it the meaning of transitionary state, and then they give it the meaning of just nationalization of the means of production. And then they give it the meaning of just any kind of state that benefits the people. They're constantly moving the goalposts as they fail to enact the previous thing they defined it as. Fiendmaw says, do you think we'll get to see or live anarchism during our lifetimes? That's the interesting thing about anarchism. Anarchism is not just one state of existence. Anarchism is a methodology, an ideology, and is advocates for a particular end goal. But living anarchism would be to say you're using anarchist principles to affect the world around you, and you're doing your best to act in accordance with those principles. But I understand that what you're really saying is an anarchist society. And as for that, I don't do fortune telling. You should watch my video Hope, which is really about saying that we should neither be optimistic nor pessimistic. We should be hopeful realists. John Doe says, do you agree that America is the most fertile country in the first world for socialist revolution? Do you think that revolution will be libertarian, anarchist, or authoritarian socialist? I really couldn't tell you what place is most fertile for revolution. I think that that's been one of the biggest mistakes of the past, has actually been that theorists are continually trying to tell us where is and is not going to be the place revolution takes place. Marx was convinced it was going to be Germany because the most advanced capitalist nation surely is going to be the place where you get the revolt of the proletarian. And that's just absolutely not the case. We got fascism. We got Nazism. And then they constantly wanted to talk about how the, peasant countries could not undergo revolution. And then it was Russia, which was largely a peasant economy when it underwent revolution. And then the next big example we saw was China, which was also dominantly a peasant economy. So I think that it's been a mistake in the past when we try to say that it has to be this kind of place, it has to be that sort of place. I think that it is going to happen wherever the efforts are made for it to happen. And if we want to see it happen in any given place, it's our responsibility to make it happen in that place. So we should, not to go in on you or anything, but I think we should stop asking the question about where it's most fertile. We should start asking ourselves how we can make every place that we are more fertile for revolution, and then begin doing what is necessary to plant the seeds within the fertile ground we create. I became socialist due to second thought. It's so bad that he's a tanky. Well, yeah, I mean, that video was not very good. And as I understand, he's more authoritarian than I thought he was when I made that video. People have now kind of given me a lot more information. But yeah, no, I mean, suffice to say that those were my comments on second thought's arguments. Don't really have any more comments about second thought as a person. Dr. R. Buen Oliva asks, "Hi, Anark. Have you ever interacted with Proudly Radical on YouTube or Twitch?" No, I do not think I have. I think I've seen the name, though. Zerge asks, "What can I do to not feel doomer about everything changing so slowly? How can I contribute?" Well, first, I would say the video Hope is made for somebody that is in your exact position right now. You should go watch my video essay, Hope. But after that, you should watch my video essays, A Modern Anarchism, parts 1, 2, and 3. But part 3, most specifically, is going to maybe help orient you within the larger landscape of revolutionary change and understand where you might be at and what sort of things you need to be doing if that's where you're at. Hey, John. He says, "Hey, Anark, John here." Okay, I'm going to take a new method here. I'm going to jump forward. What are your thoughts on Cuba, since Cuba is still independent and state socialist? Well, I wouldn't really consider Cuba socialist. I would consider them state capitalist. Let's say that they've undergone extensive nationalization campaigns. I would also maybe say that they are social democratic insofar as they have a lot of welfare programs. But they are moving more towards privatization year over year, which is not a good sign. It means they're moving more towards traditional capitalism, which I would say is even worse than state capitalism in many ways. But they do have a significant cooperative sector. That's good. I don't know how long that'll last. They don't seem to really be focusing on it very much. But, Cuba's okay. It's just another nation. They're moving more towards traditional capitalism than even state capitalism, it seems like. What's your Nestor? Can't read the name. What is your definition of revolution? Also, do you think there could be a political process masked as revolution, but aren't one in essence? Example, the Bolivarian Revolution. My understand, I think we should understand there's kind of two different understandings of revolution. You have small R revolution and big R revolution. Big R revolution is, I think, the one that most people are using on a daily basis. That is to say, they think there's going to be some big armed coup wherein everything about the previous structure is overthrown and replaced, and we create a new structure that is a liberatory structure afterwards, and we live in the society after the revolution in that sense. But what we've seen is that if you do not have an extensive period of development of alternatives and the creation of new structures, that doesn't really lead to the creation of a new society. It actually just tends to reproduce the old society, but with new rulers. So small r revolution, it tends to be just about trying to transform the conditions of society until big R revolution just becomes inevitable. And that is, I would say, best enacted by what we call prefiguration, creating the new in the shell of the old, building as many of those structures which would exist within a future society as we possibly can within the here and now. So even though I'm not going to fight against a big R revolution, I think that a big R revolution without little r revolution taking place for a long time beforehand isn't going to achieve much. Cruz Fox asks, what are the systems of domination or hierarchical power structures that you identify as priorities? I think one of the things that's most notable about my viewpoint as an anarchist is that I discourage trying to identify priorities. And I advocate that we have an intersectional approach to fighting against hierarchical power structures. So now it's obviously going to be the case that in any given locality that you're in, certain kinds of hierarchical power structures have the most power. And you should, of course, do the work to figure out which structures those are and fight back against them. But you can't just like focus all your attention on that priority in the process. You're really going to need to also be fighting back against the presence of all those other hierarchical power structures, especially as they exist within yourself, within your individual conditioning, as I sometimes call it, and your interpersonality, your interactions with other people. So I really advocate that we have an intersectional approach. I call the intersection of all of these hierarchical power structures the mega machine, or sometimes even more densely, the kyriarchal mega machine. If you want to learn more about that, go watch my video, part 1 of A Modern Anarchism. William Ham says, what would happen to historical and cultural sites, the Statue of Liberty, Monticello, etc., important to the present society after the revolution in a libertarian socialist society? That would be up to the people. Up to the people. I think that's essentially what it boils down to. If they see the Statue of Liberty as something they can reappropriate to the ideology of horizontalism, then they should. And if they don't, they should destroy it. Or they should, knock it down, put it in a museum or whatever they want to do with it, turn it into a museum if they like, but that's up to them. I think that's the most notable thing about a bottom-up approach is it's going to be up to the people what they want to do. Friend Moss says, yes, I very much meant an anarchist society. Yeah, I thought that was what you meant. But as far as if we'll see it, that is up to the effort we put in. If we want to see it, we need to make it happen. It's not an inevitability. It's something that has to be created with our hands. What do you feel about Kawasi Balagoon and New African Anarchism? I think it's awesome. Big fan of Black anarchism writ large. I think that more people should be reading Black anarchists, Kawasi Balagoon being one of them. A Soldier's Story is really good. But the one I generally recommend is Anarchism and the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. It is phenomenal and also another very good introduction to anarchism, especially the most recent edition, which starts with an introduction to anarchism. So I would really recommend reading the most recent edition of Anarchism and the Black Revolution. Philosopher Raptor says, this is an add-on to my ethnic cultural peoples having a state question from before. In an anarchist society, how would said ethnic and cultural groups be able to preserve their collective societies? I guess what I don't really understand is how it would destroy their collective societies. I think that societies are from the bottom up. They're not imposed by states. So you don't need a state in order to establish and maintain your society. If you have cultural and, ethnic traditions and, you already have that culture in place, anarchism isn't going to be a threat. Anarchism is just going to give you a variety of bodies from the bottom up that will allow you to make decisions about how you will act together and in accordance with the rest of people within the confederation of horizontal power structures. So, it's not going to really be a threat to those things. What do you think about the recent changes to the Zapatista organizational structure? I'm actually so excited about it. I got to be honest, I was kind of worried. I was anxious about what the new structure was going to look like. And I was a little bit worried, truth be told, that they were going to put a lot more power in the hands of the EZLN, which for those of you who don't know, the EZLN is not the name of the Zapatista territories. It is actually the name of their military contingent, which at one point was sort of a vanguard. But that is not what happened. Instead, they actually decentralized more. They created a more horizontal society. They went from having, hundreds of these councils to having like thousands of councils. So it was a huge movement towards horizontalism, an enormous dissolution of authoritarianism. They essentially ripped down the hierarchical power structures which existed. In fact, the 10th communique they just released talks about how they even are now starting to use the metaphor of the pyramid, which is a very anarchist thing to be talking about because it's a demonstration of hierarchical thinking. And they're basically saying they were against the pyramid, and the pyramid is to be flipped on its head, as they say. So flipping the pyramid on its head is actually a metaphor anarchists have used before. So it looks like the Zapatistas, the longer they struggle, are coming more and more to the conclusions that the anarchists have come to. And as David Graeber has talked about in The Dawn of Everything, this is because indigenous ideology had many anarchistic elements in it to begin with. So as indigenous peoples are given the opportunity to determine their own future, not dominated by some state or authority, but instead their culture is able to determine their path forward, they're actually demonstrating more and more of a desire for this horizontal liberatory impulse. So I see this transformation as being very promising and extremely hopeful. Have you read Camus' The Rebel? I think it is an interesting philosophical text, and it's a relatively easy read that has some great moments. Camus' syndicalist leanings are under-talked about, in my opinion. I've not read it. I actually own a copy, but I have not read it. Big fan of Camus, though. How could the path to anarchism change with technology rapidly changing as well? Well, what I would like to note is that what we have to do is we have to stop looking at technological advancements as just being net negatives. I see a lot of sort of like veiled anti-technological reflexes in our spaces, which I think are highly unhealthy. Every time there's some huge technological breakthrough, everybody just complains about how the enemy is going to use it. And what I want to see is people seeing a new technological breakthrough and yes, being aware of how the enemy is going to use it, because that's the case. But instead start asking ourselves, how can we use it in order to empower horizontalism? How can we use it in order to coordinate more decision making and to create more horizontal power structures between the people? Like, we have the internet now. The internet should enable our ability to coordinate over large distances and to make decisions in mass. But what I'm seeing is instead of people endeavoring to figure out a way to turn it into that platform in order for us to make decisions and to organize horizontally, I mostly just see leftists complaining about the internet. I see leftists just complaining about AI. I see leftists just complaining about every new technology that comes out. I consider that a very conservative impulse, and it's not good for our spaces. I think people should do it less. I think people should talk more about how it could be used to the benefit of our structures, how we can take those tools in hand and turn them towards our ends. So I think what we need to be doing is being more flexible and trying to look at how to take every one of these developments as opportunities instead of seeing all of them as another inevitable piece of this tide of the enemy wave winning. Once again, it just seems like a conservative impulse that people need to overcome. Andrew asks, what's your opinion on the developing the productive forces argument of auth leftists? Is a central authority necessary for mass industrialization of places that haven't yet been industrialized? Absolutely not. I mean, industrialization doesn't usually take place by way of centralization to begin with. Like, that's not how industrialization took place in any of the places before, the Bolsheviks took over in Russia. It's really not at all the default for how industrialization takes place. In fact, industrialization has taken place mostly through capitalist entities, through private power structures trying to, seek profit. So there's really no reason to believe that industrialization is in any way linked to authoritarian imposition upon the people. And that's assuming, of course, that we even want industrialization of the style that has taken place under capitalism. I think that if there is development of industry, it will probably need to look different if it is developed by the people, and the people will probably want to develop it differently so that they are not destroying the environment they live in. But absolutely not. Technology is just technology. There's no inherent sorts of power structure which is going to make you able to develop technology. In fact, the vast majority of scientific and technological advancement that takes place from the bottom up, from researchers and academics and technologists of all kinds wanting to find out answers to interesting questions. People are driven by the passion to discover and invent things. And what we need to be doing is giving them an outlet by which they can, and then those inventions can be brought to fruition. So, if you study the history of science, you can see that science flourishes when it is not imposed by authoritarianism. Authoritarianism strangles creativity of all kinds, including scientific and technological creativity. Zuz says, wasn't 1000, name of the Zapatista smallest group type, a metaphor? No, it was literal. The previous numbers they gave, where they were like, whereas there were hundreds, now there will be thousands, whereas there were dozens, now there will be hundreds. They were literally giving you the actual number of the previous structure size. And they were telling you the new structure that's on that scale, this is how many of them there will be. So like, they're developing a ton of them. In fact, before we even knew what was happening, there were already signs going up in almost every local area of GALs, which are the new autonomous entities that make decisions from the bottom up. So there's like tons of these new structures, tons and tons and tons. This is not this. It's something they actually instituted before they even told us what they were instituting. What do you think is the best book to start on reading about the Zapatistas? I don't know if I would recommend a book. I know a lot of people recommend Wobblies and Zapatistas, which you could, of course, read from there. I haven't read it, so I can't really recommend it. But I actually think you should look up this talk by Linda Kikivish. Let me see if I can find it. It's called Zapatismo and Pluriversal Ontologies. I'm going to link it here in the chat. There you go. That is the best primer I've found so far on Zapatismo. Do you want to learn about the Zapatista ideology and how they think about the world around them? That is the best summary I've found so far. Michelle Cerruti says, what do you think about postmodernism and post-anarchism? I haven't really made a secret about the fact that I am not the biggest fan of postmodernist philosophy. I think that postmodernists tend to get a lot of things right, but they kind of go overboard. They overcorrect. For example, they're like, there are no, universal narratives to history, right? And they're right to say that universal narratives are often going to miss a lot of the details, but they're wrong to say there are no universal narratives to history. They tend to try to destabilize structures of truth and truth finding and epistemology, but then they put very little back in place. They kind of they basically go all in on critique with doing very little construction. And that's really not for me. I think that we have fallen way, way, way too deep into that rabbit hole. Critique is good, but if all you've got is critique, you've got nothing. Critique doesn't build anything new. So the way I look at it is most of the postmodernist critiques are correct. Like, I actually disagree with very little of the critiques I've heard from postmodernists. I disagree with their conclusions a lot of the time. But that, you know, if I think their critiques are correct, that means I'm not going to be returning to the previous things that they were critiquing, you know, the modernists, or really they're critiquing like Enlightenment rationalism. So I'm obviously not going to be going back to Enlightenment rationalism because I agree with their criticisms. I think we need to be moving past postmodernism now. We need to be moving into what I would call meta-modernism, which is that we need to be taking in hand the critiques that we have, and then we need to be figuring out how to now construct something that is resistant to those critiques. We need to be, you know, we need an equal part deconstruction and construction. And I want to, another thing I don't like about postmodernism is how sort of ironic and self-deprecating and self-doubtful it is. I want to see a return to sincerity. I want to see a return to self-esteem and self-confidence, the development of confidence based on research and learning and understanding, not arrogance, but self-esteem. Right. And I think that, you know, this is essentially where I think postmodernism has led us, which is everybody thinking they have power because they're criticizing. They think that their criticism is power. Your criticism is meaningless unless it actually is embodied in something that can attack the power structure. And your attack all by itself, also meaningless unless you have something to replace it with, unless you were already doing the work to construct something which could actually replace that previous power structure that you want to tear down. So yeah, this is why, this is my general opinion. So post-anarchism, for that reason, most of the time, it's like, okay, I find it very navel-gazy. I think they spend a lot of time kind of meandering through philosophical concepts and not nearly enough time really giving us answers about what should be done. They've got a lot of criticisms, almost nothing constructive to say about how to do things. But that's not to say don't read it. If you find it enjoyable, read it. AI is literally unethical, Rose Redthorn says. It's not. AI is just a tool. It can be unethical, right? Kind of like a firearm, right? A firearm can be unethical if it's used to hurt somebody, but it can also not be unethical if it's used to defend somebody. You know, AI is just a tool. Literally, it's just a learning model. It's an iterative learning model. It's very similar to previous iterative learning models that we've had. But this one is just very, the ones we've got now are very, very sophisticated. They're only going to get more sophisticated. So what we need to be asking ourselves is, are we just going to let the enemy use AI for their needs? Or are we actually going to be adaptable and flexible enough to figure out how to use it for our needs as well? And figuring out how to do direct action to undermine its unethical uses by capitalists. For example, there's been this new development of a technology called poisoning, which is where you are able to get AIs you're able to push them away from content which has been created by other artists by giving them what they call poison samples. So like, these are examples of how AI could be pushed in a different direction. Also, I think when you're thinking of AI being unethical, you're thinking of just AI producing art, right? In which case, yes, there's an unethical component to it, but AI is way more diverse than that. AI can write paragraphs and talk and give text in response. There's nothing unethical about an AI outputting text. It's only unethical if the AI is like plagiarizing. So yeah, I disagree. No offense intended. This seems like exactly what I was just criticizing. ML Irizarry says, been a while since I catch one of your streams. Welcome. Here I am rambling as usual. Do you think that the whole poll, comp ball, and leftist meme thing is damaging to the left? I feel it's just role play without praxis or theory and creates unnecessary sectarianism. No, I think it's just a symptom. It's a symptom of what I've been discussing here. Everybody wants to label themselves. Everybody wants to shop in the supermarket of ideology. Everybody wants to think that their self-identification is a radical, and their loud criticism and they're shouting about what they don't like and all of that. They think that's being a radical. And so then everybody's really concerned with how they slot into one place or another in this big schema of political ideologies. And they think that's important, not what they're actually doing, not with how they're actually trying to materially change the world. And insofar as that we are over here constantly encouraging people that it's just all critique, all self-identification, and that's all that matters, then that's just what you're going to get. You're just going to get people who are more concerned with a tag in their Twitter bio than they are with actually doing anything in the real world. I think it's a symptom of this sort of a navel-gazing tendency of the modern online left. And so I don't think it's causing it. I think it's an outcome of that. And it's really our responsibility to change that by encouraging people to do something in the real world. And not only, might I add, encourage people to do things in the real world. You, as the person who is encouraging them to do something in the real world, you need to do something in the real world. Okay. Everybody loves sitting around like online, to touch grass. And it's like, are you touching grass? Everybody's like, go do something in the real world. And it's like, are you just doing something in the real world? This isn't an argument from hypocrisy. It's just like, for the love of God, people, do something that might actually threaten this power structure. Do something which, you construct something new, like make a reading group, make an organization of 3 people, like anything. That's more than arguing online. That's more than criticizing people online. So that's my opinion. Ultra Cosmic, what do you think about Hassan Perr? I've given my opinion on him numerous times, so I probably won't do it many times more, but I think he's kind of just a himbo. I don't really see him as threatening, because I don't think that 99% of his viewers are watching him in order to develop their own ideology. Nobody has ever told me, Daniel, I used to be an authoritarian leftist because of Hassan Perr, but your videos taught me otherwise. But they have done that with other people who have all kinds of ideological stances. That's because Hassan Perr is mostly just an entertainer. His ideology is kind of just like a side dish. He's mostly just doing media commentary. So I don't really see him as much of a threat, even though I really do disagree with his ideology in general. Do you think that modern anarchic theory and praxis could benefit from having individuals on the ground in Syria, Sudan, and other war-torn areas where institutional overreach is weak? Absolutely. But that's easier said than done, obviously, right? Those of us from elsewhere are not exactly going to be volunteering to travel to war-torn regions. And, we would just hope that there's already some sort of a presence of those anarchist groups. And this is not to say I'm not telling you not to do it, obviously, right? If that's something that you want to commit to, do it. But, what we should really be doing is looking for the anarchists that are already on the ground and figuring out ways to support them. Take Palestine, for example. There's FAUDA, F-A-U-D-A. We already have an anarchist group on the ground. We should be looking to popularize and fund them. It looks like I've gotten a super chat here. Eric Gray gave me $10, and he said, as Black anarchists, our response to Black capitalism and nation-state building is community control of the Black community, as well as African intercommunalism more broadly. Exactly right. So basically, Black anarchism, there are places in Black anarchism when they talk about nationalism, but a healthier nationalism, which is, an identification with a common culture of those in the African diaspora. That's that intercommunalism aspect. But it's not nation state building, right? You know, earlier I gave that definition of the state. It's about alienation of the powers of the majority of people by a small group, and black anarchists are against that. So I think that's why there's been some miscommunication from time to time with black anarchist theory among other anarchists. But yeah, black anarchism is a very notable tendency in modern anarchism. I would consider it to be one of the most modern and progressive strains of anarchism, to the degree where any anarchism which has come after black anarchism pretty much just has a responsibility to both integrate and respond to the discussions within black anarchism. Oh, then thanks for the $10. Let's see here. John Doe says, what stops the Zapatistas from being anarchist? What hierarchies remain in the territories? It's not really about the existence of the hierarchies. Anarchism is a specific ideology with a particular history. And I don't think the Zapatistas are precisely anarchist, but I do think that they agree with the anarchists on a lot of things. And that's not because they like read the anarchists and said, oh, yes, we agree. It's instead because they just came to those same conclusions organically through their experiences as people. So yeah, I think that's all that it is. It's really just that their thought doesn't root from European anarchism. It roots from their indigenous heritage and their beliefs about how, what dignity and self-determination looks like. I just so happen to agree with them. Are the Zapatistas related to Zapata in some way? Yes, they absolutely are. They're named after Emiliano Zapata, the Mexican revolutionary. Are you aware of the channel What is Politics? His and your channels have been extremely influential in my political thinking. Yes, I really like his channel. In fact, as somebody who's often read a lot about the topics he's discussing, he still teaches me things. So that should say something. You know, his videos on the Russian Revolution, I'd read like 6 books about the Russian Revolution when I did part 2 of the Statist Counter-Revolutionary, and I still learned things from his videos. So yeah, no, they're excellent. I have not watched his videos on Dawn of Everything. I'm going to finish the book before I watch those. Okay, I got to catch up. People are already answering the questions. Fafordasoon says, I heard reading group as breeding group, and I was very concerned for a moment. Hey, you know what? Let people have their kinks, okay? If they want to make a breeding group, let them make a breeding group. Expended ammunition here with the hard-hitting questions. Do you guys like lentils? I've made my position on lentils clear. I like lentils. Universal Ron says, thanks for streaming today. Also, where are you finding good information on the Zapatistas and their changes? They have been publishing communiques on their website, which is Enlace Zapatista. But I will give everybody a link real quick. I will link the 10th communique. This is the most recent one, even though this is not the one where they lay out their new structure, but this is with a website. There it is. Let's see. Catching up. Okay. Anarchy says, do you think off left is a cult of personality, considering they only ever praise the leaders of old instead of leftists, including MLs? Oh, instead of leftists actually on the ground today doing the work. Yeah, no, I think it's a very backwards looking ideology. They are constantly trying to convince us that they have some plan for the future while constantly worshiping people in the past. It's a very conservative tendency on the left. I think that in a general sense, it has the single most tendency to create cults of personality of any strain on the left. both of people that are alive and dead. You want to learn about the ones that are alive, go read about Caleb Maupin and CPI. That was pretty horrific. Can you have a nation, like, for example, people can call themselves French and be proud of it in a non-statist and non-nationalist way? Yeah, that's the contention of a lot of black anarchists, is that you can have the nation without the state. It's also the contention of Abdullah Öcalan, who is one of the primary thinkers who that led to Rojava. So the idea of the nation without the state is exactly what you say. People identify with their cultural and ethnic heritage, but they do not want the development of a state structure. They want, most likely, they're going to want some bottom-up form of control. So the nation without the state is generally going to be the way to go. You know, if you were to ask me, what do I think should happen with the Palestinians? It would be that they should develop a nation without the state, which is to say they should create autonomous territory wherein they have a confederation of councils making decisions from the bottom up. But they are currently in such deep crisis, it really is meaningless for me to say anything about what I think they should be doing. They are doing their best just to survive against a ongoing genocide. Ibrahim says, the standardization of 8 working hours is a great achievement. Can we fight for the 4 working hours? Yeah, I would say we could. But I think that most people in the modern day don't really use any of the methods which could achieve some huge reduction in working hours because they're not nearly militant enough. Like, that's what it boils down to. People think that what you're supposed to do, for example, if you wanted 4 working hours, people think you're supposed to fight for 4 working hours. You're not. You're supposed to fight for something that is well beyond 4 working hours. Ask for 2 working hours. Ask for no more work. And then watch as they reduce your working hours. They're not going to give you what you want unless you ask for well more than you want. This is why I advocate being of revolutionary demands. Revolutionary demands are going to get you the most radical concessions. Even if you're a reformist, you should make revolutionary demands because it's in the interests of achieving your reforms. This is just what history shows. The biggest reformist changes we've ever seen were those where the people had revolutionary demands, not where they were demanding reform. I asked you a while back if you thought Spider-Punk from the Into the Spider-Verse was a good representation of an anarchist in mainstream media. You hadn't seen the movie then. Have you seen it? I have not. I really have not been watching a lot of movies for a while now, but if somebody turned it on, I'd definitely watch it. Union of Britain Mapping says, what's your opinion on egoist anarcho-communism and Stirnerist philosophy in general? How can individualism be incorporated into anarchist movements? I actually cover that exact topic in part 2 of A Modern Anarchism. So you should go watch the second part of A Modern Anarchism if you want to know my opinions on that. But I actually think that anarcho-communism should be the natural outcome of egoism if one really read it consistently and took into account the facts of reality at the same time. So yeah, that's actually, I actually offer a sort of extension of egoist and anarcho-communism in that part of the series. Andrea Athos says, okay, I have a question. In your opinion, which direct actions can be used? For example, I believe that blocking a highway is not useful and seems to damage the reputation of those who are fighting. Yeah, no, I'm not against blocking a highway under all circumstances. I think that the reputation of anybody fighting is always going to be damaged. So that's not really going to be a huge consideration. I mean, you know, I was in Occupy where we tried to do everything peaceful. We called ourselves like Gandhian pacifists and stuff. It didn't matter. They smeared us anyway. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, they're gonna smear you. So then the question you should be asking is, what is it you actually want out of any given action if you don't care about your reputation? And it seems to me that highway blockages could be viable under certain circumstances. I would say that they are really good if you have concrete demands and you're like, we're going to do this until the demands are met. but they're not very good if all you're trying to do is like bring attention to a topic. I mean, it will bring attention to the topic, but people aren't going to care. You basically need to give power structures some out so that they can stop it. You know, like we saw a massive brigade or a massive blockade in, I think it was Chile back in like 2020, I believe. And that was actually pretty successful. ML Irizarry says the C in enlace is pronounced as an S. Well, now I know. Thank you very much. Pin Archives. Thoughts on Tumblr? Why not use it yourself? I've never liked Tumblr very much. As a platform, it's not very appealing to me. Flying Shark. Oh, snap. I caught one of these live. Nice beanie, Anark. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You like that beanie? Ruckley. Personally, the fact that the Zapatistas arrived at anarchist-aligned positions from outside European traditions gives me a lot of hope for a non-hierarchical future. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I think that was able to happen is because the structures they began with were horizontal structures. When you start with hierarchical structures, you're going to get more and more hierarchical structures. When you start with horizontal structures, you may get more and more horizontal structures. And I think that was one of the most notable things about the Zapatistas. Dylan says, can there be religious or Christian anarchists? I'm a Christian who has read a fair amount of theory and is trying to organize my small town, but I don't know if there's too many contradictions. I don't think there's too many contradictions for you to be a Christian anarchist. And certainly not a religious anarchist. You should go read more Christian anarchism because it's out there. Just literally go Google Christian anarchism. One of the most notable Christian anarchists is Leo Tolstoy, the famous author. In fact, he's one of the notable figures that began the trend of Christian anarchism. There is a pretty strong history of Christian anarchism, actually. So go read about Christian anarchism because I actually think that if you are in a small town, it might be a good way to communicate with people. Blank says, your videos discussing prefiguration have given me a renewed focus and purpose. And I know that's a heavy thing to lay at your feet, but I just wanted to thank you again for sharing your knowledge for free. Absolutely. Because that's actually the reason I'm doing this channel. You know, like that's what this is all about. For me, this is just part of my praxis. I really am trying to encourage all of you to act as revolutionaries. You know, this is not just a media project for me. This is not just, you know, for my vanity. This is not just to make money. This is because I actually am trying to get all of you to become anarchist revolutionaries or libertarian socialist revolutionaries. To me, this is the most important thing I could do with my life. Not necessarily exactly the YouTube channel, but getting more people to become revolutionaries, spreading a revolutionary ideology. This stuff is important to me. So you saying that, you know, that just means that I'm doing a good thing, and I appreciate you saying it. Unit of Britain Mapping asks again, is hacking a good form of revolutionary action? For example, DDoS attacks on military networks. Yeah, could be, as long as you actually have a reason and you're doing it with a concerted purpose. Because you don't want to attack the enemy randomly and all willy-nilly, because the enemy is only then going to over-prepare and become more defensive. What you want is for your enemy to not be ready for your attack when it matters. So wait until the military, for example, needs its military networks and then do massive DDoS attacks. That's what should be done. I want to see more people thinking strategically with their direct action instead of just being like, I figured out a good direct action and then just doing it. Think strategically. Ask how you can really undermine the enemy's power by doing what you're doing. And if it's going to do that, then do it. And if it's not, then don't. Ultra Cosmic says, how many hours a week do you think would be a healthy amount of work? I guess that depends on what kind of work you're doing. I think it's incredibly variable. You know, it's going to depend on how much work you're doing. It's going to depend on how much energy you have to turn towards that work. Yeah, it's too variable for me to give an answer. But obviously, you know, lessening the workday would be good. Marion Honey says, any favorite anarcho-leaning Buddhists? I would love a podcast on spirituality and meditation from a radical lens. No, I'm not super keyed in on that, sphere. However, I do follow an Instagram account called Anarcho Spirituality. That might be a good place to look. They talk a lot about spiritual traditions and their overlap with anarchism. Philosopher Raptor says, opinion on tick history and his new ANCAP aesthetics, along with his Hitler was a socialist hot takes, with his support of a free market, as well as him saying that socialism is anti-Semitic. Yeah, I mean, he's a joke. Like, every one of his videos I've watched is like straight up propaganda. It's complete distortion. It's literally just misinforming people. Extreme cherry-picked evidence, a complete misunderstanding of political theory. I got a live chat. Another one from Eric Gray. Thank you very much for $5. To Dylan, there is Christian anarchist writing and more broadly religious-based anarchist writing available on the Anarchist Library. Yeah, I just want to echo that. Even though the Anarchist Library search function is not super great, if you just go to Google and you type in the Anarchist Library and then anything you're looking for, the Anarchist Library Buddhism, you know, towards Marion Honey's point, the Anarchist Library Christianity or Christian anarchism, go type those in and Google will spit out results from the Anarchist Library and it will help you sort through the Anarchist Library. So the Anarchist Library is an enormous resource, everyone. It has so much content on it. Andrew says, how would it be possible to construct national scale infrastructure in a decentralized horizontal society? Through the coordination of all of the council structures. I think a lot of people misunderstand that when they think of decentralization, they think of a bunch of little bodies all acting by themselves without coordination. But what really happens in decentralization is that you create a bunch of overlapping circles of various sizes, and the overlapping circles coordinate interests among the pertinent groups. So what you would have is big circles. If you're trying to develop it on the scale of like a continent or a region, like you're saying, then you would have circles that coordinate the decisions of all of the councils within that region to make decisions together about what kind of structures, what kinds of infrastructure they want between them. So that's the meaning of confederation. That's what's going on with that. Andrea Athos says, what do you think about decentralized systems always being horizontal? Centralized systems are usually authoritarian, but decentralized systems can also be authoritarian, such as feudalism. Agreed, 100%. It's part of the reason why I don't spend my time just advocating for decentralization. You can create decentralization of a bunch of authoritarian structures, a bunch of tinier pyramids, and that is not necessarily good either. I think that that decentralization is only good insofar as you create confederations of horizontal power structures. So decentralization in and of itself is not necessarily good, though centralization always leads to authoritarianism. Dylan says, opinion on graffiti to spread messages. I don't think it's very successful most of the time, to be honest. It's not like I'm telling you not to do it, but I don't think it's going to do much. I don't think anybody is like, I thought something and then I saw some graffiti the other day and, it really made me think. It said 1312 and I don't know what that means, but now I hate cops. I don't think anybody changes their mind based on graffiti. The only thing that maybe it might do is create the conception that there's prevalence of some ideology. So, you see lots of Circle A's and you're like, whoa, there are a lot of anarchists around here. Or, there's like a Stop Cop City action happening. You see lots of tags for Stop Cop City and you go, oh, wow, there's a lot of action taking place lately. But I don't think that it really is going to change anybody's mind for the most part. But if you make it really pretty, if you're really good and you can make like murals of your stuff, that might be different. People might be like, whoa, very talented. People, aesthetics, much as we might hate it, aesthetics do affect people's ability to consume information. So yeah, if you can make it pretty, you've got my approval. Union of Britain mapping again. What's your opinion on Quakerism? In my opinion, I like their lack of hierarchy, but I'm interested in what you think, considering you mentioned Christian anarchism earlier. I won't pretend to know enough about them to weigh in on it. I do like you're right, though. It does seem like they're very anti-hierarchical. Seems like they are developing consensus methods very thoroughly within their own communities. But I don't know enough specifics to make any comment there. The Philosopher Raptor, you say, besides the highly statist EU, how would true European unity work alongside anarchism? Pretty much what I was just describing to that previous commenter. You're going to have big confederations wherein people make decisions together at the regional, continental, intercontinental, global scale. And then you would combine all of those horizontal structures at larger and larger scales. Sapphire says, if AI gets advanced enough to where it can pass the Turing test, should anarchism include AI liberation? Absolutely, yes. Yes, 100%. If AI becomes conscious and therefore experiences misery at its subjugation, then it should absolutely be liberated. There's no questions in my mind about it. Absolutely. I don't care if a being came from the organic background. I don't care where it came from. If it's conscious, it deserves dignity and a life of self-direction. Pin Archive says, I don't like anarcho-spirituality. They're so left unity. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of left unity, but, there's not many people talking about the topic, so I'd recommend people go follow them if they're interested in the overlap between anarchism and spiritual traditions. Azazin says, any thoughts on the Frankfurt School or critical theory in general? Some of my thoughts on postmodernism kind of apply to Frankfurt School. Critical theory, I don't think I've read wide enough to have any comments. I think the Frankfurt School is wrong that culture is quote unquote upstream from politics and that you just have to change culture and politics will begin to transform. I think that's short-sighted. There is no upstream, downstream. Everything is interacting all the time. Culture is interacting with power structures, are interacting with our ideological conditioning, is interacting with our interpersonality, is interacting with the conditions of our organizations, are interacting with our workplaces, are interacting with our conceptions of race and gender and all of that. It's all happening all at once. You can't just change one and all the others change. You have to change all of them simultaneously. It's just, that's the task we've been given. But that's overly simplistic. There's a lot of other stuff in there that's useful and very helpful, and but yeah, just that's one of my critiques. Andrea Athos, in your opinion, is organizing one's own community, such as their neighborhood, a good way to start an anarchist praxis, even if not necessarily strictly anarchist? 100% yes. There's a great way to do it. Highly recommend getting everybody to come together and starting discussions about what their struggles are. Try to get them to focus on the power structures that are oppressing them instead of petty things like, you know, the people down the street they don't like, or crime or something like that. Even crime, you could actually get people coordinated together to do self-defense, but I'd be careful. If you're organizing poor white communities, they might just consider the presence of black people or Mexican immigrants or something as being crime, and then you don't want to create a lynch mob. So be very careful with that. But I would say in a general sense, yes, but try to bring them together, for example, with a purpose, like organizing toward a tenant strike, organizing toward a coordinated workplace strike, you know, creating a neighborhood council, creating neighborhood gardens where everybody coordinates and distributes food together. You know, try to make it constructive, try to develop community, create reading groups where people read radical theory, those sorts of things. Hans Device says comically large Venn diagram, unironically a description of anarchist political structures. Not joking. Let's see here. NM, what do you think about the new Zapatista decision of going more local? I kind of answered that earlier. I think it's great. Long story short, they're doing great. Good job. Zazin says, regarding your channel introduction video you made a couple of years ago, any plans on updating it? Did anything change in your understanding of science or politics? Literally the only thing in there that I think has changed is that I wouldn't necessarily identify as an anarcho-syndicalist anymore. But I would update it only because I think I could make a much more polished channel introduction now. NM says, could you explain the EZLN in a video? I don't really do current affairs, and, you know, like I don't do really history or current affairs. Most of my stuff is just theory and praxis. So like that's really my emphasis. But the EZLN is obviously going to enter in as an example in lots of things I talk about. The next video I plan on doing is going to be a video where I basically talk about the concept of the concepts of fragility, anti-fragility, and resilience, and talk about decentralization, horizontality being a force that creates anti-fragile systems. And the EZLN is definitely going to enter into that discussion. All Nazis are nonsense, says shameless plug of myself, but I actually personally talk about Buddhism, spirituality, and anarcho-adjacent politics all the time on my stream. Not completely shameless because it does answer the question. Yeah, go follow All Nazis Are Nonsense, although, woo boy, that is an odd spelling of those. I recognize you from Twitter, however, and seen you in my comments and everything pretty often. You should... If you want to send me a link somewhere, maybe I will. If you do that before the stream is over, I'll put it in the chat for people. Have you seen anything from the YouTube channel Twin Rabbit? Yes, I've seen the video about the relation of anarchism and indigenous thought, which was a good video. So Tilcedo, I think is how it said, do you think the division on the role of the state between communists and anarchists, except Leninist traditions, come from different definitions of the state? So partly a misunderstanding? See, it's like, I want to say yes, because if you read Marx, Marx has a different conception of the state, and many of them have a different conception of the state as well. However, it's complicated because then you go, okay, that's fine. Anarchists don't agree with you on your usage of the word state. But if that's the case, anarchists do want to create a state by your understanding. So what is your actual criticism of anarchists then? Because it's weird. If they just think the state is one class, like suppressing another class, then when the workers rise up and create confederations of horizontal structures, that in their mind is a state. But then they always criticize the anarchists as, quote unquote, trying to like jump to the end step instantly. But wait, you think what the anarchists are creating is a state. So then how are they trying to jump to the end step? They're just doing a different kind of state from you. And then as soon as you realize that, all of their arguments just fall apart. They become just completely meaningless. It betrays that they know the state is not as nebulous as they're claiming. They know that what the state actually is an authoritarian structure, a structure which, alienates the masses of people from control. And this whole game, this whole shell game about what the state is by them is mostly a way, just like their discussion and their attempt to not talk about the word authoritarian. It's just a big game to obscure the conversation about what is authoritarianism? What is the state? Anarchists give clear definitions and then they apply them to the world. And then authoritarians give not as clear definitions, which they don't consistently apply to the world. So yes and no is the answer to your question. It kind of depends on which Marxist you're talking about. Sir Verbose, would you consider debating a major YouTuber like Destiny? I don't really think that would be very productive, to be honest. Destiny is not really there to learn or discuss the topics. Destiny is there to prove that liberalism is the best philosophy. And at this point, he's basically just a neoliberal. Opinion on guerrilla gardening. I don't exactly know what that means, but if you mean just like going to abandoned plots of land and gardening, it could be good, but I've heard too many stories about them like doing all this work where they spend years gardening some area and then the owner just comes in and goes, time to get out. And they just bulldoze the whole thing. So it's like, maybe. I also know the one example where it actually succeeded. They did guerrilla gardening on a plot of land they didn't own. And then the owner was like, I'm selling this land. And they fundraised the money to just buy it from the owner. And so that was good. That's a good example. Owen Belazos kind of nails it here. AI has already passed the Turing test. We need to get to better methods of testing sentience. That is absolutely correct. Because AI, in my mind, is not sentient. It's not sapient. And yet it has already passed the Turing test. Pen Archives asks, thoughts on making videos understanding an individual's politics and explaining why it doesn't fit in with a liberatory position. I assume you're asking like, maybe make a video where, oh, this person says these kind of things and has this sort of ideology. These are the best like rhetorical points to make. In which case, yeah, I'd probably consider making a video like that. Apostrophe says, are you considering creating an Anark server? I already have one. And if you want to join it, you should go become a Patreon or a patron on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK, for as little as $2 a month. Ibrahim says, what do you think about being nice and strong as a person? How is it your experience so far about trying to have both of those characteristics? Well, that is very charitable that you say that I am nice and strong. Insofar as that's true, it is not easy because people often translate being strong as being rude and confrontational. And they translate any conflict as being insult. They translate disagreement as you trying to, undermine their personhood. They identify their ideas with their personhood a lot of the time. And it can be very difficult being nice when you need to make a point, because sometimes there are certain points There's no way to be nice about it. Some points, no matter how much you sugarcoat them, people's feelings are just going to get hurt if you make that point, because the point undermines their ideology. It undermines their sense of self. And so it's a difficult thing to balance, but I think we all have to try. Sunbather said, I heard Nestor Makhno used conscription into the military as an anarchist during the Russian Civil War. Can draft ever be be anarchist? Actually, it's funny because somebody mentioned that in a previous video. I was doing an Anark response and somebody said that in the comments. And I was basically like, I guess maybe like a voluntary draft, which people didn't quite understand what I meant. And that's fine. I understand. But like, later, somebody commented under the video and were like, that's not true. Makhno never did a draft. There was no draft in either Civil War Spain, the anarchist Spain, or in Ukraine. That never happened. So I don't know where that talking point came from. I assume the Bolsheviks just made it up. Probably they were just, they were portraying as trying to get mass amounts of people to come to the fronts as conscription. Probably because there were, in both occasions to my knowledge, where they would just go around to the villages and try to recruit people to come join the fronts. And they got lots and lots of people that way. But what I read as a response to my response video was that that had never actually happened. So. Let's see here. Hans Device says, are you familiar with Paul Cockshot's ideas for an automated economy? He's an MLM, but I'm curious what you think of his ideas. I actually think I've seen his differential equation that he uses for mapping inputs and outputs. And, you know, maybe that works. I don't know. Maybe. Possibly. That being said, if it does, you don't really need centralization anymore, because everything can just be done by computers. And then you can just do bottom up horizontal power structures. And then I don't know why Paul Cockshot is a statist. It seems completely unnecessary to have a state if you can just have a computer route your entire economy. You don't even need administrators. What's the point? You just literally need the technologists to update, to keep your computers running. In366 says, there's no democratic way to walk towards anarcho-syndicalism. No, absolutely not. I mean, you know, there may be certain reforms which would be helpful, but the state is never going to allow you to transform it into not a state. It's not going to happen. It'll do literally everything within its power to crush you before it ever lets that happen. Oh, Eric Gray says, oh, I am a Patreon supporter. Was wondering how to get the Discord link to join the server. Oh, just message me anywhere. DM me on any platform that you can see me. If you're on Patreon, DM me on Patreon. If you see me on Twitter, go DM me on Twitter. I'll just send you the link. Any good sources about Zapatismo? Thank you for all the work you put into your material. It's educating me a lot. Yeah, I'll link the same one I linked a minute ago. Let's see here. There it is. Going to be in chat. Boom. John Doe says the Twitter link on your Patreon doesn't link to your Twitter. Oh, I will go fix that as soon as I can. Let's see here. The Twitter link on your page. Oh, yeah. Even Trotsky said Makhno didn't have a draft. Yeah, that's exactly what I heard. It's like, where did that even come from? I have no idea. Like, one thing I've learned is that authoritarian leftists just literally make things up. They just make things up. I've heard them say the wildest things about what happened in anarchist projects that are just false. They're just used to just saying whatever they want. It's bizarre. I have no idea. They have like no like desire for consistency. Like, what are the most important anarchist books to read in your opinion? You know, it's really hard to boil down. I can say what the most important was to me, and that was Nationalism and Culture by Rudolf Rocker. It is very dense, but for me, it was a very important book. Other than that, maybe Anarchism and the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. Anarcho-syndicalism, Theory and Practice is very, very important. You might be noticing Rudolf Rocker popping up here. But go watch my videos that are reading list videos. I did like 5 or 6 of them in a series. Have I listened to the new Andre 3000? I've not. Is it good? I mean, I like his older stuff, but I haven't listened to him since the days of like Outkast. Dira says, you have to force people to fight when you don't have a civilization worth fighting for. You're probably fighting for inequality. Yeah, that seems accurate. Ibrahim says, I want to learn the math of anarchism. Any good suggestions? There's 2 places I would tell you to look. But one is there was this paper, and I'm trying to remember, what was it? It was like, was it Analytical Anarchism, I think is what it was called. Yeah. Okay, well, I found a mirror somewhere, but like, this is a paper I read that I remember having some mathematics in it. I didn't agree with everything that was in it, just for note. But if you're actually trying to learn mathematics that is pertinent to anarchism, you should learn about complex systems analysis. And you might want to read the book by 2 authors, Mobus and Colton, called Understanding Complex Systems. It is just chocked with mathematics, and all of that mathematics is very pertinent to understanding how anarchism might function and why anarchism is robust. So, somebody said, consensus is not always practical. Are there any solutions to avoid this? Yeah, I mean, the solution is you decide if there are fallback mechanisms, right? Like, are you okay with not reaching consensus? Are you okay with there being majorities sometimes? You agree to it ahead of time, and then you can use those methods if you like. And you may, in fact, like during the discussion, realize, okay, you know what? We might just be willing to settle for a majority. You might also get, situations where people who are in the minority are just like, actually, it's fine. We'll go with it. But I actually made a video about this, which I think is literally called like When Consensus Fails. So you should go watch my video I did recently on this topic. Hey, Robert. Yeah, as Adrian pointed it out. Yeah, there's a video called When Consensus Fails. Oh, I got a super chat from Inhuman Form. Hey, Anark, fellow YouTuber here. You're my favorite channel currently. Thanks for your hard work. Yeah, absolutely. Go subscribe to Inhuman Form. Just the greatest boon I could offer upon them is that they're an Anark fan. They're an Anark fan. You all gotta go subscribe to them. It's that simple. Inhuman Form. Ibrahim says, I love anarchism that does root from Europe. Do you know any good sources for that? The statement's a little confusing only because I don't know if maybe you meant to say that does not root from Europe, because if you mean that does root from Europe, well, that's easy to find. That's all the big ones, Bakunin, Malatesta, Kropotkin, and so on. Like, that's all the big ones. But assuming you don't mean rooting from Europe, there are lots of great places to look. You can read about, for example, Muslim anarchism. You can read about Chinese anarchism. You can read about anarchism in Central and South America. Literally, I just want everybody to know that's watching this, because I've gotten a lot of these kind of specific questions. If you just Google the anarchist library, and then you just write, like, for example, Latin American anarchism or Chinese anarchism or, whatever. Literally get even specific, Korean anarchism. You will find like articles and essays, even books that have been written on the topic. So like it is that simple. I recommend you do so. Anarchy, he says, definitely going to join your Patreon sometime in the future. Well, fantastic. I appreciate it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate everyone who is a patron on this channel. Andrew P., do you think ANCAPism is just ultra neoliberalism? What are the main differences between them? Part of me thinks that anarcho-capitalism is just a big ploy to drive neoliberalism to its like furthest extent, to get a bunch of people thinking that they're supporting a liberatory ideology by actually just supporting extreme deregulation so that corporations can take complete control over everything, and that none of the creators actually cared about this concept because they knew they weren't going to get rid of the state. They just wanted to neuter the state completely. But that's kind of me conspiracy theorizing, I had a friend early in my radicalization that went from anarchist to tanky and started claiming Rojava was doing genocide, which is wild coming from a tanky. Yeah, not only is it wild coming from a tanky, it's just false. They are, in fact, being genocided right now. Anarchy says, what got you into anarchism in the first place? I did a whole video about that called My Journey to Anarchism. It's not really a simple answer. It's kind of like slowly I just realized the anarchists were right. Like I would read more and then I'd act more in the world as an organizer, and then I would see things happen and then I'd read more and I'd repeat this. And as I did, I just became more and more and more of an anarchist over the years, starting from, 2011 or so. Sadrian nails it. ANCAPs are just people who haven't realized that a corporation is an authoritarian structure that defends its control by force. That's absolutely correct. This is why I call anarcho-capitalists neo-feudalists a lot of the time. They essentially just want a bunch of lordships and serfs all over again. Andrea Athos, studying history at school, I noticed how much was needed to maintain the status quo. The only systems analyzed apart from capitalism are authoritarian systems, such as USSR or Mao's China. Yeah, absolutely. Most of these degrees are some form of authoritarian brainwashing, especially ones in like the social sciences or economics, even to some degree like anthropology, even though honestly anthropology is better about it than a lot of other ones. But pretty much all of these resign themselves to only talking about different kinds of authoritarian structures. They don't really analyze any of the structures that were horizontal. Yeah, Chinese anarchism is interesting. I especially like He Yanjin. She came up with a critical view of gender long before it went mainstream. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like anarchists are often way ahead on the issues that later get rediscovered, and then everybody claims it was their original discovery. And like, He Yanjin was almost like an intersectional feminist, like around the time of World War II. Like already coming up with concepts of a gender as performance well before Judith Butler. This is not to undermine any of the people who came up with these ideas later, but this is kind of a tale as old as anarchism for anarchism. It comes up with analyses. It has movements to back them. Everybody ignores the analyses. Later, they come up with the same stuff and slowly accidentally turn into anarchists, and nobody really recognizes that the anarchists had already been talking about it. N366 says, is it not a good idea to spread anarcho-syndicalism ideas through democratic ways and then reveal with the needed accordance? I don't think that you are going to be able to spread the ideas of anarcho-syndicalism through democracy. I just don't think that's going to be very successful. You spread the ideas of anarcho-syndicalism by building unions and trade unions. That's the basis of anarcho-syndicalism. How to combat big ag. The pesticide lobby is so powerful here in Europe. Agroecology is still seen as not able to feed the population. Any thoughts on this? Think that people need to be really, truly like doubling and tripling down on indigenous and permaculture methods. So like this is going to be one of the ways that we utilize the large plots of land is by polycropping instead of monocropping. But I'm not an ecologist or an agriculturalist, so. If a Fortitude says, genocide being genocided, who can say which is which? JBGI, I'm currently reading Full Spectrum Resistance by Eric McBay. Do you have any take on it? Any shortcomings I should be aware of? No, I have not read it, so I don't have any takes. Hey, Elisha, how you doing? The Argentine presidential candidate Milei calls himself anarcho-capitalist. Yeah, that's not shocking. He's a goofball. He looks like he's the Donald Trump or the Boris Johnson of Argentine. Philosopheraptor's opinion on the vast and diverse people of Russia and how they should go about overthrowing the Putinist government, like perhaps collective coordination. Yeah, I mean, same things I've said elsewhere. You know, it's just going to involve creating organizations from the bottom up, coordinating those organizations through confederations. And in the Russian context, you're going to have to be underground for the most part, I'd say. Being overground is going to be kind of dangerous. The overground component, you need to probably not say is anarchist, because in Russia, anarchists get suppressed very prolifically. So... Yeah, you have to be careful, but it is the same method, just underground. Eric Gray with another super chat. I became a Patreon supporter and was wondering how to get the link for the Discord server. Just send me a DM either on Patreon or anywhere where you follow me, and I'll send you the link to the Discord server. We used to have it automatically hooked up to a Discord bot, but the bot kept glitching and people would get invited and then they'd leave the server and it would like re-invite them over and over and over. And so we just disabled the Discord bot, which sucks because it was really convenient. But yeah, just send me a DM. If you follow me on Twitter, send me a DM on Twitter. On Patreon, send me a DM on Patreon. Any of those places, and I will just send you a link to the Discord server. And for the rest of you, if you want to be in the Anark Discord server, which is great and has so many good people on it, you should go become a patron on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark. And there are a bunch of different tiers. There's $2, $5, $7, $10, and $20. Any of those that you choose is enormously helpful to me. Hans Device says, I discovered anarchism through your excellent critique of Second Thoughts video. It opened up a whole new world of political theory and options for praxis for me. That's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. You know, I really thought that video was necessary given how, you know, lacking substance Second Thought's original video was, and I'm really happy to see how many people that are pulled over to the channel. I think it's a net good that more people are learning about anarchism. Ilyuni says, oh no, I think I mispronounced it again. Or it's uni. No, it's just uni, right? Uni? I forgot last time you corrected me. But yeah, I reached 100 viewers. I got over just up over 100 there for a second. Ibrahim, anarcho-capitalists are just capital fascists in favor of the business owners. Yep, that's pretty much exactly right. Sim Not Sam. Hey, Daniel, do you have a PDF of Anarchism and Worker Self-Management in Revolutionary Spain? I've been looking online, but it seems difficult to get a physical copy. No, I had to order a physical copy. Like... Is this the one you're talking about right here? This is the one by Frank Mintz. There's also one that people talk about a lot that's by Sam Dolgoff. If you're just talking about the one by Sam Dolgoff, just use the one in Anarchist Library. I don't think I have a physical copy of that one. But I've not found a PDF of that book, the one that I showed you, by Frank Mintz. The Velociraptor says, what's your view on Titoism, the Yugoslav experiment, and the Balkan Odyssey Marxist channel? I don't know anything about the Balkan Odyssey Marxist channel, but, socialist Yugoslavia is one of the only state experiments I've ever seen that had any like promise as a state experiment. They did lots of collectivization. They did a huge amount of worker cooperatives, and they did federations of workers' councils and all of that. They made the majority of decisions about the economy. I consider that socialist. It was a worker-owned economy. However, it failed precisely for the reason that authoritarian structures fail, and that is it was fragile to its central hub failing. You know, when you have everything based around a single figure, when the single figure dies, then the whole thing falls apart. It was reliant on that single figure, and that was Tito. That's the sad truth about it. And so, to me, it's just yet another example of why the state socialism doesn't work, because even in the case that we actually get a benevolent dictator like Tito, or Salvador Allende in Chile, as soon as the leader is gone, the whole thing falls apart. So, yeah, I mean, those are like my only examples that I can think of actual state socialist experiments. And I've always thought it was so weird that statists don't choose those as their examples. Like, if they really wanted to make the most forceful argument for state socialism, they should be arguing for Allende's Chile in Cybersyn and for Tito's Yugoslavia. Those are the closest that a state experiment has ever gotten to implementing socialism. But they still failed for the reasons that anarchists have pointed out a million times. Path of Eudaimonia. What source would you recommend for building up an anarchist organization from scratch, step by step, in a large city where there isn't any significant organizing yet? To my knowledge, there is no such source. What I have to tell you is that there probably, I'm going to continue producing resources which will try to answer questions like that. But what I want to say is that it's not something where there's just going to be a single guidebook that tells everybody all the answers. It's something you're just going to have to try. You're going to have to start doing. Start asking yourself serious questions about where you would start. Part of that is going to be you need to start like enveloping yourself within whatever radical organizations are available, barring if they are like authoritarian, like Leninists or something. But if you've got any sort of like left unity groups, like a DSA or something, then go join. See if there are other anarchists or libertarian socialists present. Start a reading group and use that reading group as a way to talk about radical topics with other people. And eventually that might turn into an organization. It's what happened with Scissortail, for example. Anaki says, us Maori see the whole universe as a horizontal structure. Like if a bug is on me, it's not on me nor my body inside. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. Papatuanuku, Earth, but alongside in every possible point throughout that system. Yeah, that's so interesting because that's so similar to what Bookchin says almost all indigenous ideologies think of the universe as being one big horizontal structure. If you haven't read Bookchin, you might really like Bookchin. Seamus Cameron says, wanted to say thank you for creating a modern anarchism. I'd always felt there was something important in egoist anarchism in The Unique, but I had trouble synthesizing it. Very helpful. Good, I'm glad. There was in many ways like an olive branch to individualist anarchists, but not many of them really appreciated it that way. They saw any of my criticisms as being attacks on their personhood, as I discussed earlier. Sorry for being repetitive, but what would be for you the way to anarcho-syndicalism guaranteeing the support of the majority? Building structures which benefit the majority. Begin building things from the ground up. Like, I just want to emphasize, you don't start with support and then do things and hope people support it. You start by doing things and showing that they help people. The anarchist practice doesn't, I think that, and I hope you don't take this as an insult, but you're thinking in a way which is very backwards from the anarchist praxis. You're thinking of, how do I spread the ideas and then get support ahead of time? And then we do the things because now we have support. Anarchism works the opposite direction. You start by direct action. You do the things. Do the things in the world. You create the structures you want to see, and then you prove to people those structures work and benefit them. And that creates larger support. That's what happened in Spain, for example. Anarcho-syndicalism had a semi-democratic component, but that was not what made it successful. What made it successful was they developed unions and trade union confederations, which by the end, hundreds of thousands of people were in. And so that created mass support for those. That's the way the anarchists do it. We do it by doing first and then showing people that the way we're doing things is the right way to do things. Sunbather, I heard Tito didn't prepare Yugoslavia for the case of his death because he thought capitalism would have been abolished by then. Oof, yeah, people of the late 1800s and early 1900s were very optimistic about capitalism being abolished. They just took it as a bygone conclusion that it was just going to happen naturally. Just got to give it time and boom, it'll happen. Yeah, that was unfortunately not how it works. Anakihi, I find Kropotkin and Bookchin very accurate from my culture's point of view of not dominating over nature and focusing on mutual aid. Yep, sounds about right. Makes sense. Owen Belazos, do you think you would ever try to get a beard like Kropotkin or Marx? Honestly, when I get old and ugly, yeah, totally. I'm just going to grow that thing out. I'm going to be like the old wizard of the left. Eric Gray, another donation for $5. He says, I've been thinking about engaging in black anarchist writing myself, and I do have a few topics in mind. That's fantastic. I'd like to encourage you to just start. And if you send me your work, especially once it's kind of in a draft form, I'll read over it. I'll give you pointers. And if I like it, I'll promote it. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me and we'll talk about that. Sim not saying, it's from Frank Mintz. I'm not sure if we're talking about the same title. Yes. Frank Mintz. Yeah, I only found a physical copy of that book, but somebody above says they found it on LibGen. So maybe if you go look on LibGen, you can find it. Sir Verbose says, thoughts on anarcho-primitivism? Definitely not an anarcho-primitivist. I think the thing that anarcho-primitivists get wrong is that they think tools or technology is the problem. They think technology is like inherently authoritarian. I think they've got that completely wrong. I did a video on technology that you should go watch that has some of my basic opinions on primitivism. Yeah, Fortitude says it right. Effective praxis makes converts. Not to say you shouldn't try to convince people. Obviously I'm trying to convince people. That's part of what I'm doing here on the channel, and it's been somewhat successful. But the thing that's going to convince the most people is when those who have been convinced do. It's more important to do and show people what has been done than it is just to convince people. I would say you got to do both. Convince people, do. Then doing will convince people. And then more people will convince more people will do, convincing more people. It's a feedback loop. Niccolo Machiavelli says, what if the only organizer groups in my areas are MLs? Well, I would not recommend joining them. I would recommend starting an alternative organization. And what you actually might find is that a lot of people around you are not authoritarian leftists. They just didn't have an outlet to go to. I've seen that happen numerous times in cities. People are like, the only organizations in my area are authoritarian. And then they create a small libertarian socialist group, and the libertarian socialist group finds at least 5 or 10 people over the course of a year because those 5 or 10 people just didn't have a home. And finally, now they have a home. So it's not always that easy, but you might be shocked to know how many people in your area are already libertarian socialist or anarchist. They just don't have a place to meet the people that are like them. So I will have to leave here in about 45 minutes. But I just want to note, I have to leave because I have another job that I have to go to. But if I get more patrons on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, then I wouldn't have to end these streams early to go to that other job because I'd just be able to rely on the YouTube. Then I'd be able to spend, many more hours with y'all instead of having to cut it short. Just saying, a little bit of incentive for my viewers. Hans Device. Countries failing when their founding leadership dies is very reminiscent of the life cycle of so many organizations in my area. Yeah, that's why it's important to create horizontal organizations that don't rely on a single person in order to continue. Big part of every organization I've been in that I've been part of creating or developing has been trying to develop the leadership of all of the members of that organization so that if the core membership were to pass away or be imprisoned or just burn out, that others would be able to take up the torch and move forward. Andrew P. asks, obviously it's impossible to know, but what do you think the timescale for the abolition of capitalism in the state will be? Like decades, centuries, or even longer? Yeah, the reason why I don't make predictions is because I think it's completely reliant on our action. If people act more, then it could be decades. But if people don't act, then we might have to wait for capitalism to reach a natural death, in which case it might be centuries. But yeah, no, it's going to require people to act. Like, you want to make it happen faster, begin acting. Of course, Velociraptor. I'm actually glad to answer these questions for you. All Nazis Are Nonsense says, I absolutely loved Modern Anarchism Part 2. I'm glad. What my statistics show, my analytics show, that very few people get past Part 1. I appreciate you all watching Part 1, but please continue. There's more after that. I put a huge amount of work into Parts 2 and 3. Sunbather, do you feel like European ethno-nationalists have co-opted the language of indigenous liberation from the left to claim that native whites and Europeans are being replaced? Yeah, I mean, that's mostly what's happening. It's just this old grievance politics of the dominant people in society viewing any sort of threat to their dominant position as being, genocided. It's the fragility of the dominating population. Andrea Athos says, can music effectively convey praxis? I'll just say quickly, no. But Rage Against the Machine is an example. The band's song express opposition to capitalism, critique American foreign policy, frequently reference to the Easy Lynn. See, that stuff is good. That stuff is good, and it can lead people to having more radical ideologies. In fact, I literally met somebody from Central America who learned about his radical positions from listening to Rage Against the Machine and then researching more about the topics. But I don't think anybody is going to listen to Rage Against the Machine and then know exactly what to do. I think people are going to have to read more sophisticated works than that and act in the world. Just music itself is not enough. Zal says, I'd say this channel has been more than somewhat successful. I've convinced people just by showing them videos on this channel. That's awesome. Super glad to hear it. Ruckley says, the best argument for horizontal power structures is effective horizontal organizations that help people meet their needs. That's exactly right. Andrew P. I've been informed that revealed preferences are more accurate than stated preferences. What are the implications for markets versus decentralized planning, since the latter depends on revealed preference? I won't pretend to have enough of a handling of these two topics to be able to delineate clearly. So, but I will do a little bit more reading into that to understand the distinction a little better. JBGI says, I'm in a rural area with few medical facilities. Lots of people are adept of alternative therapies and conspiracy theories. What would be the best strategy to get people to fight for proper care? Well, I mean, the first thing is bringing them together to fight for proper care. And if they don't think there's anything wrong, then step number one is agitating them to see what is wrong. You know, it's this old cycle: agitate, educate, organize. So generally you can't do it out of order. Like, if they're not already upset with the way things are, you need to show them what's wrong with the way things are, because then they will realize they deserve better. Then you educate them. You give them detailed information and theory and ideas about praxis. That's the educate. And then you do it. You all get together. You organize together. You develop structures in order to make decisions, to strike, to do direct action, to develop alternative structures. That's the organized component. So y'all can just kind of locate yourself in that. Agitate, educate, organize. Friend says, hey, Anark, I wouldn't say I agree with you 100%, but I enjoy watching you because unlike many debate bros and right-wingers, you present studies and information and not just say things without any backing. Yeah. I mean, it helps that I am very much an empirical thinker. You know, I got my degree in physics because I love science. You know, I always want to make sure that the ideas I have align with reality. I think that's very important for me. So yeah, in a general sense, you're always going to see that I will give citation, that I will give examples, that I will walk you through a rational line of argument. Grolnus del Brutus says, have you read The Wretched of the Earth? If yes, what do you think about Fanon's perspective on nationalism and culture? Should I read Rudolf Rocker's book after reading Fanon? I love Wretched of the Earth. In fact, soon you'll be seeing some content on Wretched of the Earth. But I don't know if Fanon and Rocker are talking about exactly the same topics. That being said, Rudolf Rocker, I agree with him more than I agree with Fanon on the development of culture. And I think that Rudolf Rocker's work in nationalism and culture demonstrates a much broader spanning knowledge of how culture develops than Fanon, even though I have a great deal of respect for Fanon. I actually like the Wretched of the Earth. I think I agree with about 98% of it. But there are some methodological and historical mistakes that Fanon makes because I think he's reading a little too narrowly into the African context. But still, everybody should read The Wretched of the Earth. It is extremely topical right now because of Palestine. But please read Nationalism and Culture as well. It's phenomenal. Letsov says, hey, Anark, do you have any opinion on the tyranny of structurelessness? I'm quite new to anarchism and it seemed very sensible to me, but a quick search on the Anarchist library. Well, the thing is that the essay makes a lot of good points, but I think the essay sometimes gets wielded improperly against anarchists because they don't really understand that anarchists have alternatives to that. The problem is that anti-organizationalism has become so popular among anarchists that people don't seem to understand that that's not the dominant tendency in anarchism. The dominant tendency in anarchism is an organizationalist tendency, not anti-organizationalism. The tyranny of structurelessness is more just a critique of individualist anarchists. Got another donation from Eric Gray. I appreciate you for being so generous today. It's much appreciated. He says, Anark got his degree in physics and I got my degree in math. STEM nerds unite. Also, how do I get the link to the Discord server as a Patreon donor? My friend, I don't know if you're not hearing me, but I don't want to make you keep giving me money to ask that question. I keep telling you, just send me a DM on Patreon and I will send you the link. I hope you're not giving me the money just to get that information. I told you a few times here. I'm just not going to put the Discord link here in the chat. Only giving it to Patreon or patrons at the moment. So just get a hold of me somehow. Send me a DM on any platform that is available. Patreon's probably the most sensible one. You know, you're already on the Patreon, so. John Doe says, do you ever worry about employers finding you online and rejecting or firing you? Has it already happened? Wonder how often being on BreadTube impacts one's life. Yeah, I mean, that could happen. So far it hasn't though. So far. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe by the time that's a problem, the channel will be big enough and I will just be making my income from the channel and my Patreon. Once again, I'll just note that I won't have to worry about that. It's another reason why you should go become a patron of my Patreon so that all these radical things I'm saying, advocating for revolution and the overthrow of capitalism, if I get fired from my job, I don't have to just, go find another job. I can actually rely on the channel and just make more content for y'all instead. Ruckley says, when Modern Anarchism Part 2 was all combining insights from physics, complexity theory, systems analysis, emergence theory, chaos theory, and social ecology, I was all, this is my jam. Yeah, I mean, that's a summary. Modern Anarchism Part 2 is me essentially combining insights from physics, complexity theory, systems analysis, emergence theory, chaos theory, and social ecology to justify why anarchism is correct. Okay, you want a strong justification for anarchism. It is very strong justification. Andrew P. Sorry, in my earlier question, I meant to say that decentralized planning depends on stated preferences. It was a neoclassical economist that used this as an argument against decentralized planning. Yeah, I thought that was the case. I thought that's what you must have meant, just on my base assumption of what those words meant. But yeah, I mean, my previous answer is still basically correct. That being said, I mean, under anarchism, if y'all want to create a market, you can create a market. Like, that's something you can do. And it should be said that the market is going to continue to exist through the transition period between this world and the next, right? It's not like we can immediately abolish the market and do decentralized planning. So that means that if the market demonstrates that it can exist in an anarchist society and that it doesn't overwhelm the horizontal power of the people, then you can maintain it. But I suspect that when the time comes, when we're not being pressured by a bunch of outside systems to maintain the commodity form, that we won't want to have the commodity form. But I trust the horizontal power structures of the world that are created and move us into the future to make decisions about what kind of society they want to live in. That's the key for me. Hello from the UK. NM says, how can I understand horizontal power structures better? In my head, I still see a pyramid, but in the inverse. I guess you could imagine it like that, but it's not. It's more like a bunch of compartments sitting side by side, because we're essentially it's like there is no hierarchy because nobody is given decision-making but everyone. Everyone is given the decision-making power. Therefore, delegation is just us being like, you said you would do X, go do X. It's like delegation is like, Joe said he would go. We all agreed we wanted pizza. Joe said he'd go drive to get the pizza. Joe is the delegate. Joe comes back. Joe doesn't have doesn't get to make the decision on if we get pizza or tacos next time. We all reconvene and decide if we want pizza or tacos. And then maybe, Jill is the one who goes and gets us tacos when we decide that next time. That's the difference between delegation and representation. Representation would be like, we decide Joe gets to decide what we have for dinner every single night. And if we don't like that, we can't vote to get rid of the position of Joe as decision maker. We have to choose a new person to make decisions about what we are allowed to eat. Oh, okay, you don't like Joe? Well, vote for Jill, because Jill will make decisions more like blah, blah, blah. Horizontalism is like, no, nobody ever gets to make the decisions but us. We make the decisions and then we decide if people carry it out. So you can think of that delegation as being like a hierarchical position, inverted pyramid. That's fine. The Zapatistas kind of think of it that way, but I don't think of it that way. I think it as being the abolition of the pyramid structure. But if you want to understand more, you could go watch my video after the revolution, or you could watch A Modern Anarchism Part 2, for example. I got a apostrophe says, just subscribe to the Patreon. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That is extremely helpful. The Velociraptor says, do you think the college, university, and broader education system is authoritarian, considering the hierarchy between the professors and the students? I ask as I'm 3 years away from going there. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's fundamentally authoritarian structure throughout all of it. In the classroom, it's authoritarian. The teacher decides everything. There's nothing you can do about that. There's no voting, no decision making. The structure of the college is authoritarian. It's pyramidal. The more power is wielded, the higher up you go. Yeah, it 100% is. That being said, it's one of the only places you can go to get some of the knowledge that you're getting there. And what you're getting more than anything when you go to college, the biggest thing you're getting out of college is that you are getting close contact with experts. These experts can teach you things that it would have taken you decades to learn, and then you'll learn it in like a few months, because they know all of the little tips and tricks and loopholes, and they're going to tell you exactly what to study to make rapid progress. So fortunately, yes, it is authoritarian, but there aren't very many alternatives at the moment. Pin Archive says, opinions on fast jacketing anti-civs. Bad thing to do. Don't fast jacket anti-civs. Even though I disagree with them, they're not fascists. Now, don't get me wrong. You've got like somebody like Ted Kaczynski, who kind of is a fascist anti-civ. So it's not like they're all not anti-civs. I mean, they're all not fascists, but Angus IW has given me a super chat here for $2, and I appreciate it, Angus. No message, but I see you. First time they've given on stream. I appreciate it very much. Oh, okay, Eric. I just did not want to make you keep giving money so that you could ask that same question. I was feeling bad about it, but that's all it is. Send me a DM somewhere. Sir Verbose says, I feel like if I made a channel like this, I would just not show my face to avoid that issue. Yeah, you'll notice that doesn't go on for very long. People will identify more with you. They'll connect more with the channel. They'll listen to your points even more if they can connect it to a face. Your face is... We are all evolutionarily conditioned to pay attention to people's faces. We connect better to people when we see their faces. So it's just kind of part of developing a YouTube channel. Now, you do it however you like, but that's what I found. Flop says, hey, Anark, what are your thoughts on Yanis Varoufakis' thesis of global capitalism entering a techno-feudalist phase by way of tech corps like Amazon taking massive amounts of capital outside of the markets? Yeah, unfortunately, I got to agree with him. I think capitalism has always been kind of this structure right on the border of some feudal behaviors, right? It always kind of seems like it's threatening to fall back into feudalism through its own mechanisms. And I think he's right to say that that's kind of the direction we're seeing things go as corporations become bigger and bigger and bigger, multinational, and able to control international governments. But we'll see. We'll see. I do think it has some noted differences insofar as that the feudal lords are no longer under the monarchies and vassals to the kings, and constrained to a national territory, but are instead international. It's almost like the feudal lords are more powerful than the kings, which has happened at some points in history. But when it does, it generally leads to a warring states period. So probably not good. We'll see. Apostrophe, $1,000 a month isn't enough to live off of where you are. No, I wish it were. Inflation has been crazy. When I first started this channel, I think that if I had had the income I have right now, I would have been fine. In fact, this is around where I was originally aiming when I started the channel. But it's not even in the last 3 years, in the last year, inflation has been out of control, wildly out of control. It's really the cost of food more than anything else. The cost of food has just blown up. The cost of almost everything is so far up. Gas has mostly been stable, which is good for me because I have to drive for my work. But wow. Inflation has hit me super hard. And so, yeah, no, unfortunately, I mean, it's like I'm right on the cusp. I've been saying that for the last year, but it's because I'm only barely outpacing inflation with the speed of my Patreon growing. I hope it continues to grow at that speed so that I can continue outpacing inflation and maybe eventually get to that spot where I don't need a second job. I got another super chat from Mason Morgan. They ask, preferred interpretation of quantum mechanics. And this is exactly the kind of nerd shit that I'm here for. I'm gonna calm myself and not go on a ramble. But for everybody that's listening, there's kind of three dominant interpretations of quantum mechanics. You have the Copenhagen interpretation. You have the Bohmian interpretation. And you have the Everettian interpretation. And you're probably all somewhat familiar with these. There's more. There's a whole bunch more. There's a ton people don't even know about. But the Copenhagen interpretation is the wave function, the position and velocity of a particle is not understood until it is measured. Until it is measured, it is a probability density, a superposition of all possible states that particle could be in. Okay, it could be in any of the states within the wave function, and when you measure it, it assumes one of them. In fact, you might have been taught this, in popular, jargon about QM. This is kind of the one they often teach. This is called the Copenhagen interpretation. The second one that I mentioned is called the Bohmian interpretation, sometimes called a hidden variable theory, which says, no, the particle does indeed have a definite velocity and position before you measure it. There's just a variable we are not able to measure directly that makes it to where we can't really, we aren't able to determine both at the same time. And collapse is a figment. There's no collapsing taking place when we measure. Measurement is not significant. The universe doesn't care if we measure it. It has a position and a velocity. We just can't know it because we don't know a hidden part of the theory, a hidden chunk of the formulation. The third one, the Everettian interpretation, is also pretty famous. People have probably heard of it, and it's called the many worlds interpretation. That is to say, there's an infinite number of universes, and in all of those universes, the universes are slightly different. Little tiny things are different. The particles are all in slightly different positions. Things played out a little bit different. That's where all of our fiction's playing around with this right now. What a lot of people don't know is that these can't coexist. You can't have the Copenhagen interpretation at the same time as you have the many worlds the hypothesis. My position is the Copenhagen interpretation is wrong. I think it's incorrect. I think it's popular because it's easy, and physics has essentially abandoned philosophical inspection. Any philosophical inspection would discard the Copenhagen interpretation just instantly. It's nonsensical. I think it is between the hidden variable theory and the many worlds theory. I think that it's going to involve some kind of large upper dimensions. So, what we're seeing is it looks non-local down here. Sorry, I'm getting into the jargon. it looks like there's this action at a distance down here. But what's really happening is there's some much, much, much larger multi-dimensional object that we are all actually just part of, and we're kind of sweeping through the multi-dimensional object. So I think it's like the mini universes are that object. And the hidden variables, we just don't know the topology of the object. The object has some specific topology, and we are just not aware of it. And to us, that appears as a quote unquote hidden variable. But what it really is a hidden object that is like, that we are just a shadow traveling across. Hopefully that made sense to somebody in the audience. I don't know who, maybe Mason Morgan understood what the hell I just said, but anyway, so, let's go back up here. Read theory, anarchist, anarch, hold my books. Yeah. Flop says, Zizek has recently argued for a coalition between anti-capitalists and productive small capitalists to combat this, which sounds ridiculous. Yeah. It is ridiculous. I would say there should be a coalition between anti-capitalists and people who are in cooperatives. I do think cooperatives have a place here. What do you think? FIFA says, what do you think about less theory and more practice? Don't get me wrong, theory is important, but it seems to turn people off, and I'm thinking about how practice can get me back into more theory. If all you're doing is reading theory, more practice, less theory. But for people who are all practice, they need more theory. You have to do both. It's that simple. Okay. If all you're doing is theory, get into praxis. If all you're doing is praxis, you need to read theory. You got to balance them at all times. They mutually reinforce each other. So. Andrea Athos, in your opinion, shouldn't the way history is taught be changed? For example, the history textbooks I've read do not mention the crimes committed by Italy during World War II, which seems like brainwashing. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I suppose you could do that if you got into a position as a professor in a history department. But ultimately, I think it just due to the fact that authoritarian structures that are embedded in other authoritarian structures are always going to have some better interest or some interest in perpetuating the ideological narrative of the structure they're embedded in. So authoritarian, the classrooms are going to promote the what I call hierarchical realism. Hierarchy is the only way it can be. And this hierarchy we're inside, that's the good one. We're in the good hierarchy. Helmholtz says, I'm working on a social network to connect people with their environment and neighborhood. I think it will lead to people becoming anarchists without even noticing. That's a great attempt. I hope that works. Might I also add, if you want to add to that, having some capability, include a consensus voting method within the structure of the social network itself. Just embed it seamlessly and let people make decisions together about all of those things they're connected on. Bernard Barari says, have you considered inviting subscribers or patrons onto streams and having longer form conversations with them? Looking at the comments, there are many people with adjacent knowledge to yours. Yeah, I have so many smart people following me. It's awesome, honestly. I love the questions and comments I get on these streams. The reason why I'm always super down to do them. That being said, I do find that as soon as even one person is on stream, it kind of just goes off in that direction. It becomes an interview, I guess is what I'm saying. An interview is different from a live stream where I communicate with the audience. So it seems like they're kind of fulfilling two different functions. Now, I would be down for having more kind of interviews and discussions like that. And it's possible that those will be hole fillers, kind of like this one was. You know, this video is sort of a hole filler for the fact that I wasn't able to produce a video last night to come out today, so I did a live stream, and I'd be willing to do like interviews and discussions with those. So yeah, and I've done one or two before. But yeah, so many smart people following me. It's wild, like experts in all kinds of stuff. Fortitude says, yep, that's why YouTube thumbnails are always creators making a holy shit face or whatever. Yeah, because people are like, whoa, it's a face. And the human brain's like, face? MC Carol de Niederoy says, do you recommend any book to understand anarchist economy and model of society after capitalism? Yeah, go research Paracon, Participatory Economics by Albert and Hanel. Just start with the book No Bosses. I read it recently, and it's a great starter. Really answers a ton of questions. No Bosses by Michael Albert. Andrew P. says, have you heard the claim that Mao's China was state feudalist because it didn't have a labor market like the USSR? Well, that would be a good argument if it didn't have a labor market, but it did have a labor market at various points. You know, the thing is about the USSR and Maoist China is that they went through different stages of development and economic organization. So there were various points within Maoist China where they were just like doing things almost like the old style beforehand. And sometimes they were just doing things like capitalism. People just going and getting hired into private firms. And sometimes they did things where people were assigned to workplaces. In both occasions, they did all kinds of mixtures. So I think that might be accurate for the very beginning when they were still doing a lot of Corby labor, but it didn't really stay that way. So I'm not sure if that's really an accurate way to describe it. Okay, I'm going to jump forward a little bit because we only got about 10 minutes. What do you think of the infinite money theory or infinite monkey theory? I'm not sure if that is about the quantum comments I was making or if it's something else, but we tried to get a bunch of monkeys together and they were not able to write anything, if that's what you're talking about. Apples Pabble says, I like the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. I have not heard of that. Sapphire, isn't Schrodinger's cat a criticism of the Copenhagen interpretation? Yes, it was actually Einstein and Schrodinger criticizing the Copenhagen interpretation, and it remains a very good criticism of the Copenhagen interpretation. I find it hilarious that people use it as a way to describe the Copenhagen interpretation. It should strike people as absurd. Okay, no, Daniel, don't do this. Okay, calm down. Yes, correct. Moving on. I hate the way measure or observe is used in quantum mechanics. To me, it just means interacted with, since you need to strike the electron with a photon to measure it, as I understand it, which isn't much. Yeah, there are some people, this is actually part of what's called the the measurement problem for the Copenhagen interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation cannot define what a measurement is. The problem is that what it considers to be a measurement is like, I'll know it when I see it kind of thing. And that usually boils down to a human observer making a measurement. The problem is that, as you say, it seems like that would boil down to interaction. But if interaction collapses quantum states, then there should be no uncollapsed quantum states in the entire universe, because every single quantum system in the universe is in interaction with the rest of the universe. So that means that everything should be collapsed because everything is being interacted with. I'm just, once again, going to stop myself. Next. VVW says, like a massive landscape, our universe rolls along, and as we roll over different terrain, it affects reality and probably, yes, exactly. Jimbo Viticon says, your modern anarchism series is really cool as fuck. That's what I like to hear. See, that's the kind of advertisement I'm looking for. Everybody should just spread that everywhere. Modern anarchism series is cool as fuck. And then everybody starts watching it and they're like, what is this dense philosophical shit I'm listening to? But no, I'm putting a huge amount of effort into this series. I'm working on the 4th part right now. I'm going to aim to be done by the end of the year. We'll see. But yeah, I put a huge amount of effort into these parts. Metal Gear says, why do you say the Soviet Union was state capitalist when the NEP under Lenin ended under Stalin? because the NEP is not the only thing that qualified as state capitalist. It's state capitalist when nationalization campaigns are taking place, and when the state acts as the monopoly capitalist. Direct distribution was an extremely short-lived affair in the Soviet Union. It is extremely overhyped how prevalent it was, and so even when it existed, it was not the only way they were organizing things. The industry was still taking place for profit accumulation under the Soviet Union at all stages. There's no stage where it was not. After the failure of their form of direct distribution through centralized planning, they went right back to privatization campaigns again. And that only took place more and more and more up until the end of the Soviet Union, wherein they just collapsed and became just regular old capitalist again. Sir Verbo says, do you think you'll do more responsive videos to big channels like Second Thought, since it got the most views, would probably grow your channel more? That is precisely why I'm going to avoid it, because it is a perverse incentive, and I do not want to give in to perverse incentives. I want to keep the channel on the track that I think is best for the channel, and that is radicalizing people, not doing response videos. Let's see here. Speaking of Ann Prims, what are your thoughts on the Unabomber and the Industrial Revolution? It's bad. I hate the prevalence of Ted Kaczynski in our spaces. I think he's a reactionary. I think that he has a fascist politics. I don't think anybody should be spreading his work unless they want to spread fascism among our communities. There's just so many better people to read if you just want a critique of technology, yo. Like, he's not the only guy doing this. He's not even the best that has done this. Just go read elsewhere. Go read actual anarcho-primitivists. Fucking Ted Kaczynski is like a fascist primitivist. Thoughts on the Anarchist FAQ channel? I don't think I've seen the channel, or if I have, it's just the one where they just read off the Anarchist FAQ. If that's the one, then that's pretty cool. I hope they keep getting bigger. What do you think about introducing people to anarchy through a tabletop session? Fun or... Wait, oop, I lost it. It disappeared. Oh my gosh. There it is. Fun or too boring? No, I actually did that. I actually... There was little do you all know, but I'm a GM for a tabletop game. And one of the campaigns we did was a campaign where I started them all out in poverty. Like, they rolled in the lowest possible characters that were incredibly weak. They were in the most crime-ridden city in the entire empire. And I didn't really know what they were going to do, but I knew there was going to be a revolution taking place in the background during the campaign, and they could or could not participate, and they could participate on any side they liked. I wasn't really devoted to how they were going to interact with that. But they all, because they were in poverty, immediately sided with the revolution and became revolutionaries. And throughout the campaign, I used it as an opportunity where because they now live in a post-feudal society, they knew that feudalism is bad. Okay. Oh yeah, this is a fantasy medieval universe, I should say. They knew feudalism is bad, but every time they would talk to NPCs, I would use capitalist talking points, but I would make it the arguments for feudalism. Like, what are you talking about? Like, the lords are there because they deserve that power. Like, that's the reason they have that power. We're too lazy, you know, like, we should be grateful that they're making all these decisions. I don't want to have to make all of those decisions, you know. Thank God we have the lords to rule the territories and protect us. You know, I certainly would not be able to put on armor and go defend the territories. I have to, you know, till the fields. So I'm so grateful that the lords manage all of that for us, you know, and like, just, and it was so funny, like, watching the wheels turn in their head, you know, like, they were like, oh, all right. And they had to develop arguments that the arguments they were developing with these NPCs also would be the arguments they would develop against capitalism. By the end of it, they were all anti-capitalist. Every player in that campaign, by the end of it, was anti-capitalist. And between sessions, or while we were like doing sessions and taking breaks, we were often discussing anarchism. So yeah, it can be very successful if you do it right. I think that method I just described is probably a good one. Do you know of any anarchist career counselors? What would that be? What would they say? I really don't know. Never heard of one. State capitalism is not when the state facilitates private capitalist production. That is incorrect. That is just capitalism, or sometimes you might just call it social democracy. State capitalism is when the state becomes the capitalist. State capitalism is the effect of nationalization campaigns where the state becomes the new monopoly employer. So the definition you're giving here is actually just incorrect. State capitalism is the result of nationalization, not facilitating private capitalist industry. But they did that too, the whole time. Ruckley says, you need to do a stream that is just you ranting about physics. I'm loving this. Oh God, do not get me started. I've literally ranted to friends about it for so long. I've spent like hours and hours and hours talking about this stuff with people that were in the major and talking with friends about it and so on. What type of anarchism do you want to see in the USA? I mean, I would just say that anarchism, you know, I'm an anarchist. I would say that anarchism is developing the means for people to make decisions about the world and what they want, how they want to live. So what's your favorite food? I don't know. I kind of just love like Mexican food. Everybody around me knows that I just love chips and salsa. I just cannot get enough. Love it. Love chips and salsa. Love street tacos. Love spicy food in general. Love Indian food. Apostrophe says, thoughts on the French, except the E has an asterisk like it's a slur. Very complex people. They both have a history of revolt and overthrowing tyrants, and also a history of tyrants. So they have both. They have both. I hope the overthrowing tyrants part wins out. JBGI says, anything useful from blockchain technologies in a future anarchist confederation, maybe for governance? You know, I won't rule it out as a possibility. I think a lot of people misunderstand, think the blockchain is just all about the production of cryptocurrencies, but the blockchain is just a technology. It is a trustless ledger, essentially. It keeps track of interactions and it keeps track of them anonymously. Insofar as that, is that valuable to keep track of trustless, anonymous interactions in an anarchist society? Kind of seems like it's going in the opposite direction from what we want. And that is to say, we want high trust interactions. We want face-to-face interactions. So it almost seems like that's going in the opposite direction of what we're looking for. But if there is somebody who's really into the technology, knows more about it than me, and can make it work towards our ends, then I'm open to it. Like I said, I'm not some kind of conservative about technology. I do not knee-jerk react to new technologies being developed and say they're just bad because they get used by capitalists to do bad things. But the way that the blockchain is implemented in cryptocurrencies is 99.999% bad. FF Fortitude says, GMing tabletop games is one of the reasons I realized you don't actually need vertical power structures to organize. Yeah, absolutely not. Getting people together for a common purpose is actually not that hard. Wow. Yeah, wow. When they're really like invested in it, they kind of want to do it, huh? LIUXOB says, are you planning to make a listen social democrats? I think it would be a good idea. Yeah, probably. I think I might do a lot more of those listen X videos, and social democrats seem like a good target. So we're coming around to the end of the stream. I'm going to answer these last few questions and then we're going to call it a day. Ghoul66 says, hello, Anark. I've really enjoyed a lot of your videos, and while I may not agree with everything, only most, I think I've been enriched by your videos and wanted you to know. Well, I appreciate it, and I'm glad to have you here. IDK Man says, are you open to having a discussion with any authoritarian leftists, like Midwestern Marx, for example, who happens to be streaming right now? Yes, under the conditions that I think it would be a productive conversation. I'm not going to be going on and doing debates with people that I think is just going to be a big shit show, and we're just going to end up yelling at each other. I literally am not going to do that, no matter how much it would help the channel. However, if I think it would be productive, I will do that. But it's not generally going to be the direction I'm taking the channel. I do not want this channel to become a debate bro channel or a response channel. I want it to remain a channel about theory and praxis. So DSFF, when anarchism spaces are invaded, how do you fight back? You'll have to be more clear. I'm not sure. I don't know if you mean military or if you mean like people infiltrating the spaces. Answers are kind of different for those. Rachel Kahn, yes. Oh, it's Rachel. Hey, Rachel. Hard to justify wide-scale adoption of blockchain technology without quantum computing at the very least. The energy cost is wildly high. Yeah, that's one of the most unethical parts about it. Current implementation doesn't really get us very much and is wildly processor intensive. So yeah, they're trying to develop ones that are less processor intensive, or I think they use like video RAM, but so far the biggest ones are extremely process intensive. All right. I think we are going to call it a day, my friends. Reading these last few comments here. Yeah, I think we're going to end it there. It was good talking with y'all. This was a good stream. Now I got to go get ready to go do other things, go work the other job. But it was good talking with y'all, and I'll see you soon.